In the kingdom of Falsford, when boys and girls hit 15, they don't just grow up. They're pulled into the rite of the Oracle, a coming-of-age ceremony that hands them the special skills they'll need to conquer life. Ecto Glenred, the Count's third son, was drawing closer to his own ceremony in Grandy, the bustling capital of Falsford. And on the ride there, Count ran Glenred beside him. Ecto kept hearing that old family legend again. The Glenraids were legendary for birthing tri-attribute mages who could command fire, water, and wind. And even though he'd heard it 100 times, he still stared out the carriage window, thinking hard as the kingdom rolled past in a blur of noise and color. Ecto swore to his father he wouldn't fail him, vowing to chase the best skill he could possibly master. Because Count Rand Glenred, ruler of the southernmost slice of Falsford, always got what he wanted and expected nothing less from his son. He was convinced nobles had to master skills drawn from the three brutal elements, because those powers decided fights and kept their status untouchable. And the ceremony poured out all kinds of magic, from blacksmithing to commerce to boosting pure physical strength. But nobles like Ecto usually chased magic instead. Work, especially across those three key elements, skills so rare they couldn't be forced with mere effort or raw strength alone. Even with every obstacle stacked against him, Ecto kept dreaming, chasing the impossible goal of a tri-attribute mage, swearing the Glenreid's noble bloodline would lead him straight to his destiny. The long-awaited oracle ceremony was finally here. Everyone's breath caught as the old chief mage braced himself to reveal Ecto Glenred's attribute. Ecto, the proud heir of the noble Glenred family, was vibrating with anticipation, but the mage stalled, dragging the moment out like he was toying with fate. When he finally broke the silence, he slammed the truth down. Ecto's attribute was earth. Rand Glenred, Ecto's father, exploded in rage. He swore there had to be a mistake, but the old mage shut him down hard, declaring the outcome was carved in fate and nothing could change it. Rand couldn't swallow the result. He was crushed, shattered. The Glenreid family had always been famous for kids born with fire, water, and wind, and now Ecto, their third son, had wrecked that proud legacy. For Rand, it felt like a straight-up disgrace. Ecto tried to soothe him, but Rand snapped. He swung and struck Ecto across the face. Rand's rage exploded. He roared that Ecto had shamed their ancient family honor, and Ecto crumpled under the punch and the brutal words while his father kept attacking, accusing, and humiliating him. Felt Ecto's oldest brother cut in with a chilling voice, saying that sure, bending earth and stones could look handy. But it drained magic like crazy, so the whole attribute was a waste, and in a fight Ecto was basically dead weight. Act II's son nodded along with zero sympathy, and added that it made total sense their father was furious, because Earth was tagged as one of the worst attributes. Both brothers tore Ecto apart, calling him a stain on the family, and those cruel words kept screaming in his head as he just sat in silence, waiting for his father to choose his punishment. Life turned suffocating for Ecto. He wasn't allowed at the family table. He was shut out and looked down on, and his siblings and even the servants dodged him like he was poison, mocking him to his face. And then he snapped that he reeked like cow manure, while Ecto, who used to dream of wielding the wind attribute, stared on in disbelief. Now despair and confusion slammed him so hard he couldn't breathe. He couldn't fathom why his own family's hatred burned that intensely. And under his father's command, Ecto was locked in house for 6 brutal months. That brutal isolation crushed Rand Glenred, and when it finally let up, he slammed down his last decision. Ecto would be banished from the Glenred family forever, unworthy of the name, according to Rand. As punishment, he crowned Ecto as the ruler of Boda, a lonely village on the far western edge of their huge land, and Rand made it brutally clear. Ecto was out of the family for good, never to set foot back in their ancestral home again. From that moment, Ecto would live as a free commoner, serving the Glenreid name with zero right to their status or their history. Ecto soon figured out Boda wasn't just any village. It sat out in the brutal barren lands, boxed in by thick wild forests packed with monsters that could crush a man. The whole place felt untamed and unfinished, where survival wasn't some promise, it was a gamble. And then it hit him. His father had dragged him here on purpose, hoping he'd never come back or that he'd get himself killed. Rand wouldn't kill him outright, though doing that would stain their noble name. So Ecto clenched his teeth and vowed to stay alive on his own. Ecto rolled out with the advancing wing squad, led by Amanda, a blade-hammering swordswoman and their fearless leader. Yet even she couldn't hide her irritation, steaming that she had to march all that way just to serve some pampered rich kid. Aurum, an earth mage and half-gnome, tried to shake off the dread by reminding everyone about the huge reward waiting for them. 10 gold coins each, no questions asked, just for escorting Ecto and driving the carriage. The crew also had Sepha, a half-elf archer who didn't even flinch at the job, and Nora, a half-giant tank who stood up front and took the hits like a wall. Together, they made a squad you could trust with your life. This wasn't some random escort team. This was the Advancing Wing Squad, ranked B in the Adventurer ranking system, F to A. B rank meant they were seriously skilled and built to chew through dangerous missions, so Ecto's safety on the road wasn't just hoped for, it was guarded. Tucked inside the team was Doreen, the fire sorceress on magic duty, and the real shock was the pay. Each escort member was offered a jaw-dropping 10 gold coins, unheard of for jobs like this, while a regular person could live comfortably for a whole month on just 2. Ecto also got hit with a huge, unexpected cash gift from his father, Rand Glenreed, right before he left. And even with his father's obvious hatred, that shocking gesture left Ecto stunned. He stacked it with part of his own secret savings, plus little contributions from his brothers, and suddenly the money felt like a shield. No financial trouble, not for now. Then, after traveling for a while, the cramped carriage started driving him nuts, and Ecto finally snapped at Amanda, demanding to know how much longer until they reached Boda village. Amanda shut him down in seconds, telling him not to talk to her like that, warning him she'd never waste her time on spoiled rich kids with no real skills, then ordering him to stay quiet and stay put in the carriage. Ecto felt the truth hit him. This trip would keep exposing every one of his failures. Orem was friendlier, sure. He even told Ecto they'd reach Boda village in about 2 more weeks, but Amanda snapped at him on the spot, warning him not to talk to their client without her say-so. Orem just chuckled, brushing it off by calling Amanda rude and claiming she needed better manners. And that's when their trip jolted into danger. Nora spotted something weird up ahead. She snapped the group into action. Bandits were already roaming free, and they just stripped another carriage clean. Seeing the danger coming, being spotted any second, Amanda snapped into action and told her team to get ready to strike, and right then Ecto jumped in and begged to fight with her. They barked orders at him to stay put in the carriage. This was their job, and they meant it. Ecto ignored her orders, crashed along with the group, insisting he had a plan. Amanda shut him down fast, saying his earth magic wouldn't help here, and told him to go back no matter what. Proving his worth, Ecto revealed that his powerful bloodline flooded him with a huge reserve of magical energy. He wanted everyone to see that even with an earth attribute, he could still make a real difference. So Amanda snapped. Ecto can do whatever he wants, but she made it crystal clear she wouldn't own the consequences for him. Ecto then slammed it into place. He'd take full responsibility for his own actions. At that moment, at 10 years old, he caught a brutal, mysterious fever. And in that haze, Ecto snapped back to a memory of his past life as a Japanese man living in the 21st century. That one memory flipped his whole life, driving him to grind for the last 6 months and sharpen every ounce of his magic, especially earth magic, where he cooked up wild, brand new techniques nobody in this world had ever seen before. Now Ecto's vowed to put his skills to the test against the bandits, and they didn't even flinch at his arrival. They snapped into formation and charged straight at him, and this was Ecto's moment to strike, fueled by a massive surge of magic power. He forged an earth mesh that snapped the attacking bandits to pieces without breaking a sweat. The earth buckled under their feet, split with sharp cracks, and widened raging rifts straight toward the bandits and their horses. Terrified out of their minds, the horses reared up and sent their riders crashing to the ground in pure panic. Amanda spotted the chaos Ecto unleashed, and without wasting a second, she barked orders for her squad to attack. She charged right into the chaos, swinging her massive sword like she'd been born for battle. Nora, this super-strong half-giant, sliced through a whole swarm of bandits like it was nothing. She slammed her shield forward like a battering ram, smashing straight through the enemy's defenses and leaving them reeling in shock, while Ecto hung back and watched the fight play out, so impressed by the adventurers' raw power and razor-sharp teamwork. Orem, the tiniest fighter on the team, fought like a hero and refused to back down, sprinting through the chaos, darting in and out of the crush. Meanwhile, Sepha, the skilled half-elf archer, rained down volley after volley of arrows. Numbers kept landing, one after another, cutting the bandits down until their ranks thinned fast. And the deadliest storm in all of it was Doreen, the fire sorceress. Her blazing spells turned every bandit who stepped in her way into ash with nowhere to run. The sheer punch of this B-rank crew was so wild that even Ecto couldn't believe it. While the adventurers clashed, Ecto snapped his magic into action and snagged a few fleeing bandits. Orm lit up, declaring the rest of the gang was crushed and scattered, and the ones caught shook in terror, begging for mercy as they finally understood how hopeless the fight was. Orm showed zero mercy. He pushed for the captives to be left tied up as punishment, because once night hit, monsters would hunt them down and tear them apart, and honestly, it felt like the cruel fate those predators deserved. The bandits shook with terror at the idea of being used as monster bait, begging Ecto for mercy with their voices cracking. Yet Ecto refused to step in and let the adventurer's choice play out. He calmly shrugged off the matter, and to his shock, Amanda actually praised his magical skills, admitting he'd helped the team crush it and was almost as good as they were, until that sudden recognition lit a fire in Ecto. The aristocrat's exiled son, Ecto. When they finally recognized him, he shot Amanda a grateful nod, then replayed his performance in his head. It hit him. He didn't need some grand plan, he just had to picture what he wanted, and his body answered with raw, powerful magic on instinct. Sure, doubt still clawed at him, but hearing those battle-ready adventurers call out his potential felt insanely satisfying. Meanwhile, Nora burst into the wrecked wagons and found survivors hiding in the wreckage, then raced back to tell Amanda. Right among the crowd, an albedo merchant stepped forward, introduced himself, and said he'd been hustling for business in Capital Grand. Then Ecto's shoulders finally dropped with relief, because he'd found survivors at last. He told them his crew was headed straight for Boda village, and the merchant looked genuinely shocked by that weird detour, but he swallowed his questions and stayed quiet. Orem crawled over the merchant's wagon, saw how wrecked it was, and declared it was headed nowhere, so Albedo, panicking at his own bad luck, started scrambling for a way to haul his precious cargo to safety. With razor-sharp wit, he begged the group for help, promising they'd be paid if they'd escort him and his things to the nearest town. Ecto agreed. Seeing it as their shot to level up the whole journey, Ecto pushed for one more move. Haul the captured bandits with them too. There could be a reward waiting if they turned them in. Amanda nodded, ready to lock it in, but just before they could finalize everything, the wreckage spat out a new survivor, a young girl named Rena, hiding inside the wagon. And then Albedo eased out cautiously, explaining that Rena was his assistant, his slave maid, and asking if she could come along too. The adventurers froze at her stunning beauty, and Ecto, the ultimate gentleman, refused to leave her behind in that deadly forest. Ecto flashed Rena a warm smile and said how thrilled he was to finally meet her, then carefully plucked a stuck feather from her hair, only for Rena to get startled by it right away. He darted behind Albedo the moment danger felt near. Ecto's hopes of a friendly chat died on the spot, because the timid girl's reaction screamed that she didn't just dislike strangers, she feared them. The carriage jolted over the rough road when Albedo, buzzing with curiosity, pressed Ecto about why he was heading to some far-off wasteland. Then she pointed out that Boda village sat out near the western border, deep in the sticks. Ecto kept his guard up and dodged giving anything away to this strange merchant, admitting only that he was following an order from Count Glenred. Ecto proudly announced he was honored to become the lord of Boda village, and Albedo burst out laughing, because he just tossed out those wild rumors about dragons lurking in those lands, right alongside the usual monsters, and this was the first time Ecto had ever even heard of dragons there, so he went from shocked to instantly hooked. He confessed that dragons were totally captivating. Myths were the only place he'd ever seen them, and the thought of them roaming on his own land lit up his curiosity like wildfire. Albedo caught himself genuinely liking the young man, then even asked Ecto if he could swing by Boda every 3 months, claiming that with a guy like him running the village as lord, trade would feel safe. Ecto was stunned by how far Albedo was willing to go and pushed back, asking if he'd really travel that much just to keep this connection alive. Albedo didn't back down, he made it clear he wanted it, so Ecto finally felt it. This friendship could be the perfect beginning to his new life. Ecto's carriage jolted forward, hauling the merchant and his maid Renee straight to the nearest town. While back with the adventurers, the captured bandits finally got dealt with. Yet Ecto and Albedo couldn't stop replaying that miraculous rescue and how everything that happened had forged them into a team. When Amanda came back, she thrust Ecto his cut of the bandit bounty, way more than he'd ever expected, and it left him grinning. Albedo, relieved and grateful after being saved, tried to throw in a reward too, but Ecto waved it off politely, insisting he already had plenty of money and didn't need anything else. Albedo had something bigger planned. Everyone, including Ecto, was stunned when the merchant handed over Rena as a thank you gift. The merchant said Rena could read, write, do math, and handle the house like a pro, so she'd be the perfect helper for Ecto in his new home. But Rena didn't shout or fight, she just looked mortified. Albedo admitted he'd seen how those girls kept admiring Ecto, and he decided this arrangement was best for everyone. And Ecto, he was even more shocked by one thing. Rena didn't resent her master at all. Albedo then slipped her hand into Rin's, canceled her slave contract on the spot, and stamped her with true freedom. He offered Ecto the chance to forge a fresh contract with her if he wanted to, but Ecto shut him down hard, no room for doubt. He explained that with Rin finally free, he didn't want a slave or any binding contract. So he turned to her and asked if she'd join him on her own, then headed straight for the village of Boda. The girl froze at his kindness, then said she'd gladly live under his rule if he didn't mind, before thanking him for handing her freedom and for pulling her out of the forest and saving her life. With tears in her eyes, Rin declared she'd stay right by Ecto's side, loyal, devoted, and hanging on her every word. While Ecto's smile lit up, and that new sense of companionship finally clicked into place. They fired out orders for everyone to get ready as they pushed on, racing toward Boda village. Half a month had already slammed by since Ecto and his crew tore out of Grand, the kingdom's capital, and now they were moments from Boda village, after another town, only to find the roads shrinking fast as they hit the outskirts. Amanda wasted no time and sent Oram ahead to sniff out trouble, and soon he came back with news that sent alarm bells ringing. Boda's village was getting slammed by a roaring horde of orcs, rampaging, savage beasts who were basically living nightmares, spilling around every corner and surrounding the place. Their only wall, a weak wooden fence, was literally wobbling on the edge of collapse. The villagers stood there weaponless and untrained, utterly doomed. The group snapped into action, read the battlefield in seconds, and knew one thing for sure. Orcs didn't just fight, they crushed. Spun out of a wild frenzy that normal people couldn't survive for a second. And with the villagers already outnumbered and no outside help coming, their survival looked flat out impossible. Amanda snapped the group back to reality, reminding them they had one job: safely escort Ecto to the village. Orcs weren't on the schedule and they wouldn't get paid for the trouble. But Ecto couldn't look away from the villagers, suffering, so he threw out a tempting offer to light a fire under the adventurers. The young lord slapped down a promise: 1 gold coin for every orc they killed. And that's how the orc hunt officially ignited. The adventurers snapped into action, hungry for the reward, vowing to wipe out every last orc. Just before the fighting started, Ecto grabbed Rinny's attention and told her to stay put in the carriage for her safety, swearing he'd come back the moment the danger was over. Meanwhile, back in the village, it was straight up do or die. Angie led the villagers as orcs slammed into them from every side, too many and too strong to stop. And even with sheer grit on their side, that crude gate was one good hit away from breaking, right when the battle looked completely finished. Just as the orcs surged forward, a sudden ambush from behind slammed into them and ripped their attack apart. Ecto and the adventurers hit the invaders with a sudden, brutal offensive, and the orcs didn't even see it coming. Then the adventurers tore into them without wasting a second, mowing them down and flipping the battle in their favor, while the villagers, shocked by the unexpected reinforcements, felt hope spark the moment they watched the first orcs drop. Among the adventurers, Ecto tore through the chaos with insane talent. An earth mage who slammed a colossal wall of stone down on the orcs, crushing their escape routes and leaving them with nowhere to run. For most mages, that kind of spell would have been the absolute ceiling of what they could ever pull off. But for Ecto, it was effortless. He had an insane stash of magical energy, and he kept launching, crushing spells like it was nothing. Not satisfied with just his magic, Ecto also swung steel like a master, slicing through the orcs with razor-precise, battle-honed control. Amanda, the battle-worn adventurer, stared in disbelief as his swordsmanship lit her mind on fire, because she'd sworn an earth mage like Ecto would fight with magic alone. But then his blade work stole the show, and when she pressed him, he shrugged like it was nothing. As a noble, he'd been trained in swordsmanship by the best teachers around. His father paid a fortune to hire him. Amanda only begged Ecto not to drain too much of their prayers, so they could still scrape out a decent living, and Ecto swore he'd be careful not to. With the dust finally settling, Oram, the nimble half-dwarf, rushed straight to Ecto with his news. After the fight, he snatched every last magic stone from the fallen orcs and counted 24 total. Amanda then stepped in and said the adventurers would get paid in gold coins, while the magic stones would go to Ecto. And yeah, these weren't just rocks. Each one was forged from the magic energy of slain monsters, super rare, insanely valuable, and traded for resources or cash at way better rates than most folks could hope for. Ecto spotted how hard the adventurer had helped win the fight, so he pocketed only half the stones and handed the rest to Amanda's team as extra prize money. An act of kindness that landed perfectly, because Amanda couldn't stop thanking him, grinning at the bonus earnings. And Ecto couldn't help but smile at how doubtful they'd been of him at first. Until they saw his power and generosity, their minds changed fast, and Angie, the village chief, stepped forward to thank everyone for showing up and saving the day, and demanded to know if they were adventurers. Then he marched forward and introduced himself as the chief of Boda. Ecto, desperate to prove he owned this place, shoved in his own name too, claiming he'd been named the village's new lord by Rand Glenred's command. The whole thing left Chief Angie staring like, wait, what? Nobody expected this young lord to step up and take control. Then Ecto thrust an official letter into Angie's hands, sealed with the Glen family emblem. The moment she saw that seal, she snapped the letter open and read the Margrave's orders, and when she finished, she strode to the villagers and declared they now had a new lord. It was Ecto's timing that saved the village, and the people, shaking with relief, thanked him over and over. Angie stayed humble, saying there wasn't much her little village could offer in gratitude, but Ecto only promised one thing. He'd do everything he could to turn Boda into a real town. Duty burning in her chest, Chief Angie practically dragged Ecto along to tour the village he agreed, and the moment they stepped in, reality hit hard. Busted, nearly collapsing houses, barren fields with nothing to show for them, and villagers who looked utterly drained. Ecto realized turning this struggling village into a thriving settlement would take way more grit than he ever expected, and Angie, the village chief, hurried in to apologize to him. He told him straight up that the village had no inns, so there was nowhere for him to sleep, but Ecto stepped in, waved it off, and promised he'd have plenty of free land. Angie then offered Ecto a perfect piece of land, and Ecto instantly liked it. So the young Earth Mage said he planned to build his own house there, as long as nobody minded, and Angie agreed on the spot, handing the land to Ecto to use. With Earth magic blazing in his hands, Ecto whipped up a pile of bricks and stacked them fast into a gorgeous house. The house towered over the others in the village, and Ecto couldn't help smiling at how it turned out, because in just 15 minutes he'd built a magnificent. A tough brick house loomed over everything around it, impossible to miss. The villagers stared in awe at that wild house, and the adventurers rushed inside to see it for themselves, gawking at the stunning outside, then pausing at how plain the inside felt. Ecto said magic can't easily conjure furniture, but he'd figure out another way soon, then asked if he could build a house for her whole team using magic. Ecto reminded Amanda that she'd promised to head back to the capital once the escort mission was done, but Amanda refused and lit up with a new plan. If Lord Boda was so capable, she thought, then Boda Village could become a place way more exciting than the capital. With no other adventurers anywhere near them, her team had no rivals to worry about. Then the villagers stepped in too, urging Ecto to build their houses, and Ecto loved it, because from this point on, he wasn't just an escort anymore, he was the lord of the village. He kicked things off by building a house for Amanda and her crew, then tore into rebuilding every home across the village, because he knew making the place truly livable wouldn't happen overnight. The very next day, Ecto wasted zero time and declared he was going to rebuild the whole settlement from the ground up, and Orm's help was priceless, especially since she's an Earth Mage, the kind who could flawlessly organize everything needed, from walls and floors to all the crucial pieces. The village walls weren't just fixed. They were rebuilt with tough earthen strength, and Ecto pushed for iron armor on the outside. Iron was scarce in the raw form, but the village still had plenty of usable iron lying around. Ecto unleashed magic to twist the ore's very elements, scrubbing it clean and forging it into usable iron, and his whole process was unlike anything anyone had seen, powered by what he'd learned from Japan's methods. By the end of the day, Ecto had hammered every last piece of iron from the village clean, then forged it into a brutal new gate to protect everyone, and handed the leftover metal straight to the village blacksmith, Birkin, to use for whatever came next. So when the grind finally left them both exhausted, Ecto and Orm crashed into lunch for the first time that day, just as Ecto stood there at the doorstep. Rena greeted him at the door and told him the food was ready, and the young lord blinked in shock. She was dressed in fine, made clothes now. She laughed and said the outfit just made housework a whole lot easier, so she could keep everything running smoothly. Ecto then eased in, reminding her she wasn't a slave anymore and that their old contract was already over. Rena was free, truly free, to do exactly what she wanted. Rena didn't beat around the bush. She spilled that she wanted to stay with Ecto and keep caring for him, and even offered to be the house's maid so everyone would be better off. Ecto was stunned, clearly not ready for that surprise, while Orm's patience snapped, and he demanded they start dinner right now. Right before they dug in, Ecto pushed the meal aside and demanded a quick wash after that brutal day. Renee jumped to heat up water and fetch a towel, but he stopped her mid-step, then told Renee and himself to leave first, and Orm to jump in beside him as they headed to the garden. Ecto's mind was already racing with an idea, and he snapped up a good spot fast. Then Aurum, burning with curiosity, asked if he was planning another house. Ecto admitted he had the plan, but since no geysers were running nearby, he'd have to start drilling. Then he unleashed a magical geologic survey spell to pinpoint the perfect location. Ecto's earth magic let him peer into the ground's makeup, only as deep as his spell could reach, and if he pushed the limits, he could analyze it all the way down to 500 meters. After spotting the perfect place, the young mage carved out a massive ditch and ringed it with stones, then plunged underground and started digging a brutal deep hole. Before long, a geyser of blazing hot water blasted out of the hole, and the girls erupted with pure excitement at the mind-blowing outdoor bath. While they soaked in that warm bath, Ecto finally let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, pure, fresh relief, like the water itself was healing him, and the best part, he'd built this bath with his own hands. Out of nowhere, Aurum slid in beside him, grinning as she stretched out in that hot water, while Ecto suddenly felt way too exposed by how bold she was, but still didn't say a word. Meanwhile, Rin slid into the bath too, smiling brightly as she offered to help Ecto, rubbing his back and giving him a soothing massage. Soon after, Amanda burst in, lured by the steamy scent of the hot water, and she immediately teased Ecto, asking if he'd made that hot spring just for his own fun. Still, all thoughts of the others slipped away, and before long, the whole adventuring crew piled into the bath. Ecto couldn't stand it, though. They showed up like they'd been invited without a single word to him. Even though his irritation burned, nobody cared. They just bombarded Ecto, begging him to make hot springs for their own homes. Overwhelmed and emotionally wrecked, Ecto found a quick excuse and bolted away from the girls in a panicked blur. And that wild, hilarious mess sparked something unexpected. By the very next day, a brand new public bathhouse was built in Boda, and the whole village erupted with joy. After digging into the local soil himself, Ecto realized it was starving, too low on nutrients to keep any crops growing. Village Chief Angie admitted they'd already tried dumping forest soil onto the fields, but it did absolutely nothing, and year after year, the village kept reaping miserable harvests. Ecto blinked in disbelief. 2 whole weeks had already slipped by since he took the title of Lord of Boda. Thanks to the adventurers, every house had risen back from the rubble, and the water system was finally running. Now he had to face the village's worst problem, the growing hunger. Chief Angie explained that the villagers tried hunting to pad their meals, but they could only take down low-rank monsters, and that never cut it against hunger. Renee pushed for training new hunters to beef up both safety and food, yet Ecto shut that down with a plan of his own. He said Amanda and her team were perfect for the job, so he'd tackle the crop crisis first while the adventurers were out hunting. Ecto demanded the back gate be opened and ordered forest soil to be brought in, and Angie, dead skeptical, shot back that they'd tried this before and it failed. But Ecto refused to budge, insisting the mix of different soils could finally make it work. Angie rallied the villagers to fall in line with their lord's plan, urging everyone to team up with Ecto. And when the work finally started, Ecto caught sight of those stunning, perfectly forged iron gates. Once again, he couldn't help but smile at how skilled his blacksmiths were. Then the villagers turned to him and asked how much forest soil his scheme would need, and Ecto, cool as ever, shocked them by saying, "Just 1 cart." After hours of brutal prep, the boys finally exhaled at this sudden answer. Ecto snapped that his land improvement magic feeds the soil with magical energy to boost fertility. But it only works if the starting ground has at least a little nutrients, so he had to dump in forest soil first to give the magic something to build on. Once Ecto stirred the forest soil into the ground, he snapped his magic into action. Within minutes, he ripped off the suspense and announced the process was done. Chief Angie couldn't believe how fast everything changed, and the villagers rushed in, scooping up the soil with shaking hands, only to find it turned into lush, fertile ground, richer than anything they'd ever seen. They erupted with joy, saying they could finally grow way more vegetables than before. Rena praised Ecto for his brilliant work, but the young lord only bowed his head, hoping he hadn't messed anything up. Chief Angie and every villager rushed together to thank Ecto for getting their fields working again, until Ecto leaned in and reminded them he benefited too, then fired everyone up to team up and make the village boom. His words hit hard, their respect for this young lord shot even higher, and they kept praising him with all their hearts, right as Ecto stood among the crowd. Suddenly, a silhouette popped into view, straight up looking like an orc, so panic hit and he froze in place, until warm, friendly laughter rang out and snapped his fear away. Turns out it was Aurum and Nora, back in town in disguise, pulling a prank on the young lord, and when their plan actually worked, they couldn't stop grinning at Ecto's reaction. Amanda fired back that their hunting crew had wiped out 3 orcs and bagged a giant boar, so the villagers were set with fresh meat for a long, long stretch. Amanda lit up as she spilled every detail of their wild hunt through the deadly forest, practically glowing with pride. But she made one thing crystal clear. That meat didn't come cheap, and her team deserved fair pay for what they risked. Ecto didn't waste a word. He snapped 4 gold coins into Amanda's hands, and everyone instantly got what they wanted. Turns out Ecto teaming up with the adventurers was a win for both sides. The adventurers were grinding hard for the village, holding the line, grabbing supplies, and stepping in whenever trouble hit. With Boda's buzz growing louder, the village chief kept firing off fresh ideas to boost everything under Ecto's watch, and that momentum only snowballed. Then Amanda got blindsided when Ecto called her over and ordered the adventurers to train the village hunters. Because the young lord had a simple truth. The villagers wanted revenge on the forest monsters, and if they learned to hunt, their food would stop coming from just one place and finally spread out. To sweeten the deal, Ecto promised Amanda every last magic stone they'd hauled from those monsters. For Ecto, feeding the villagers came before any pile of stones, and the more the adventurers drilled the hunters, the more Amanda's pay shot up, tightening cooperation between everyone in the process. Amanda didn't hesitate for even a second. She snapped up the deal because it was too good to pass. The adventurers swore they'd give it their all to train the hunters. Ecto was thrilled by Amanda's call, and Renee wasted no time, handing over a list of 45 men, ages 14 to 30, all built for the hunt. Ecto pushed for splitting them up with some learning bowwork while others drilled sword and spear. And just when everyone expected anything but this, Sepha, the quiet half-elf, stepped up and volunteered to teach. She didn't just offer to train her in bow techniques. She went all in, teaching swordsmanship too, and Ecto couldn't believe how eager the usually reserved Sepha was, but it made him grin from ear to ear. It looked like the perfect fit for the job of an instructor. Without hesitation, Ecto snapped approved for the half-elf's candidacy, sure she'd lead the new recruits with real skill and careful guidance. And when Amanda found out Sepha was signing up to be an instructor, rage hit her like a storm. She burst into Ecto's house without warning, steam practically rolling off her, and announced, hard, that she wasn't hunting trouble, but she'd never let Sepha run training for the recruits. Ecto blinked, confused, and asked if this was all about Sepha's looks distracting the apprentice hunters. Amanda snarled back that Ecto didn't get Sepha at all, then growled a warning not to brush her advice aside. Those words struck home, leaving Ecto staring into the silence, because deep down he finally saw it. He hadn't known the adventurers for long, and he really didn't know their personalities or what they'd been through. All Ecto really knew about Sepha was skin deep, those jaw-dropping emerald green locks and that poised, elegant vibe. To him, she looked like a gentle, graceful half-elf, at first, but once Sepha stepped forward, it became clear she wasn't simple at all. In the very first training session, Sepha strode in with a presence that demanded attention, told the recruits she'd be their instructor for 3 months, and made it crystal clear they'd call her ma'am the entire time. Only the young guys, dazzled by her beauty, genuinely thought she was kidding. Sepha yanked out her blade, swung once, and dropped a massive tree like it was nothing, quashing every doubt in the same breath. And she made it clear her training would be brutal, focused, and painfully specific. No one would dare disobey. None of that was allowed. The recruits' laughs fizzled out fast, replaced by real fear, because Sepha wasn't the sweet, elegant half-elf they pictured. She turned out to be a ruthless, hard-driving warrior, and she made one thing crystal clear. Any defiance or childish messing around would earn them severe punishment. The moment the recruits realized they'd been under her command all along, they snapped out, "Yes, ma'am." In perfect unison, without skipping a beat, Sepha barked and they sprinted multiple marathons straight around the village. And Ecto couldn't stop thinking about it. One battlefield shift, and a person's whole aura can flip in an instant. Sepha's no-nonsense, unyielding attitude shattered every hope Boda had for easy training. And that's how the demon instructor's grueling, hellish program for Boda's future hunters began. 3 months after brutal training, those former recruits had morphed into Chad-built, swaggering hunters, proof that strength and discipline were locked in their bones. Now they ran as a special unit, patrolling the village every single day to keep it safe. One morning, just like always, a hunter stepped up and swore there was zero sign of danger around the settlement. Ecto gave him credit for his diligence, then told them to actually rest sometimes, because they'd been working themselves to the bone just to protect everyone. Later that day, a sentinel on the battlements blared the alarm. An unfamiliar wagon was hauling in fast. The guard demanded orders, and Ecto, burning with curiosity, sprinted off to check it out. A second sentinel shouted that the wagons had halted far from the village walls, leaving it anyone's guess who or what was coming closer. Ecto's excitement flared as he raced up the wall to find out for himself. Ever since he'd arrived in the village, no visitors had shown up, so this felt wildly rare. He pressed his eye to the telescope and instantly spotted the bright merchant Albedo, an old friend he hadn't seen in months. With a grin on his face, Ecto commanded the gates to fly open and eagerly ushered Albedo into his home. Inside, Ecto served the merchant steaming aromatic tea and a spread of mouth-watering sweets, and as they chatted, Ecto clocked the moment. Albedo showed up exactly 3 months after his last visit, right on schedule. The merchant shot me an apology, claiming a few extra days were unavoidable because a bunch of trade deals in another town had dragged him behind schedule. Albedo stared in awe at how totally the village had transformed, heaped praise on the gorgeous new houses, the thick green fields, and those tough outer walls guarded by heavy, intimidating iron gates. The merchant finally caved and admitted he'd only heard rumors about the settlement. Yet he still couldn't believe how insanely better it looked, and he laughed and asked whether earth magic was the secret behind the whole transformation. Ecto's face lit up at Albedo's kind words. He admitted earth magic had helped, but then he grinned and said he wasn't done yet. Albedo, fired up by Ecto's dreams, told him how excited she was to see what this young lord would pull off next. After they traded pleasantries, Albedo snapped his hands together like a grand curtain call, and the business was officially underway. Moments later, a bunch of burly guys stormed into the room, hauling huge sacks with grim focus. Ecto stared, stunned, as they dropped them right in front of him, then walked off, leaving him buzzing with anticipation for whatever the merchant was hiding. Merchant Albedo rolled into the village with a wagon full of goods, and she sold the essentials so fast eager residents practically swarmed her. Then the cash piled up so hard the whole place felt richer. Next, Albedo snapped up nearly every magic crystal and monster material the villagers had hauled in, and when the dust settled, Boda's wealth skyrocketed past what he'd ever had before. Albedo admitted he never expected the village to be packed with valuable goods, and the moment he saw its potential, he realized it could become a trading hub. So he told Ecto he wanted a trading post set up in Boda, as long as the young lord was okay with it, and Ecto, sure the villagers would be ecstatic to finally get their first store, snapped up the idea. The two of them hammered out the details, and while Albedo offered to cover a hefty 20% tax on every sale, Ecto, more generous by far, insisted 10% was plenty. Albedo warned that building the store would drain a ton of money, but Ecto pounded his chest and promised he'd personally take charge of the construction. At the same time, Ecto demanded that Albedo set fair prices for the goods so the villagers could finally get what they needed. Albedo hesitated for a heartbeat, enough that Ecto snapped, "What's the problem?" Eventually, the merchant caved and signed on, and then the two of them locked in the perfect spot for the store. They picked the exact center of the village, right on the main street, where people were always swarming, perfect for business. And when Albedo demanded when construction would kick off, Ecto bragged it would start right away and take no longer than 20 minutes, and Albedo just burst into a huge laugh like it was the funniest joke ever. When the store miraculously popped into existence in just half an hour, Albedo froze, totally stunned, couldn't even process what he was seeing. Then Ecto pushed him to ask Oram for help with the store's interior design. He promised the merchant that Oram was insanely skilled and could craft any design or setup he wanted. And when the store snapped into place in just 20 minutes, Albedo practically couldn't contain her excitement. He admitted that life in Boda keeps blowing his mind, and this moment made it obvious just how unreal magic really is. Once the shop was done, the merchant decided it was time to unload the goods he'd brought, then shouted for a guy named Kay to take charge. "See you next time." A cat girl came sprinting as Albedo called, and Kay, curious as ever, leaned in and asked what the merchant wanted. When Albedo said he needed her to run the new store in Boda, Kay's face flickered with sharp, obvious anger. She snapped that she didn't want to live in some unknown backwater village, until Albedo shot in fast and promised a huge reward for the remote job, and the moment Kay heard it, her whole attitude flipped as she eagerly demanded the assignment for herself. With a bright smile, Kay thanked Ecto for letting her trade in the village, then admitted she'd heard nothing but glowing things about his skills as both a leader and a mage. Ecto beamed back, thanking her just as warmly, and that's how the very first store run by a cat girl kicked off in Boda. Just days after Albedo vanished, an unexpected crisis slammed into the village, and the wall guards were the first ones to spot it. A huge wave of frightened refugees surged toward them, crying for help, and the guards panicked, rushing to ring the bells. They screamed the warning to the whole village. Danger might be lurking. So Amanda and her fearless adventurers instantly grabbed their gear and braced for the worst. Ecto snapped into action and sprinted to the city walls to size things up. Sentries had tracked the threat. Over 100 people were closing in on the village, and their frantic moves screamed that they were being hunted. With a crisp pair of binoculars in hand, Ecto zeroed in on the chaos, watching a terrified crowd bolt in panic while a pack of goblins churned through the distance right on their heels. The young lord's stomach dropped at what he saw, but he snapped into action and mapped out a rescue. Ecto barked for the guards to fling open the main gate and let the refugees pour into the village, then slammed it shut the second everyone was inside to trap the goblins out. Boda's defenders snapped to attention and carried out his orders, shielding the crowd from danger, while Ecto wheeled toward Amanda and her team, those attacking wings, and ordered them to slice through the goblins hanging outside the walls. They had to be wiped out fast, before anyone got hurt again, and the adventurers immediately braced themselves to fight and keep the village safe from this fresh nightmare. The adventurers were ready to fight, and Amanda, like always, swore she'd squeeze every drop of this battle for all it was worth. The moment they cleared the city gates, the team snapped into formation and surged forward with pure resolve, while a few stragglers from the refugee crowd trailed behind them, yelling for the main group to hurry up. Ecto stood among the adventurers, roaring to fight beside his people, and when the battle exploded, he slammed his earth magic into the ground, forging a brutal barrier that stopped the goblins cold. Still, these creatures were smarter than anyone guessed. They tried to slip around the obstacle, but Sepha, the half-elf, shut that plan down fast, mowing the most vicious goblins down with razor-precise arrows. From the city walls, the fresh hunters loosed volley after volley of arrows, holding the goblins back before they could get any closer. Sepha's brutal training forged them into unstoppable defenders, and you could see their skill the second they stepped into place. While Doreen and Orim, Amanda's team mages, rained down brutal fire spells, they bolstered the adventurers and piled even more destruction onto the chaos. Ecto kept juggling strikes between earth magic and razor-sharp sword moves, proving he could dominate with both, and then together. Those moves proved Boda's military muscle was finally stacking up, and the walls were so solid monsters couldn't crack them anymore. Then, as the fight dragged on, Amanda spotted something that just didn't add up. Goblins had already been wiped out by more than half, yet their spirits somehow stayed insanely high, something that should have made monsters fall back. But instead Amanda was so lost in thought that she didn't see the danger sneaking up behind her. But Ecto shouted just in time. She launched aside and barely dodged a surprise strike, because the Goblin King was a towering, terrifying force. Doreen the sorceress reared up and seized Doreen, and Amanda, shocked by the sudden attack, snapped back fast, then caught sight of massive fireballs streaking through the air, hurled by goblin mages and generals who had crashed into the battle. This tight, coordinated counterattack screamed one truth. Those goblins weren't just fighting, they were going feral, and the moment the higher-ranking goblins showed up, they snapped into full confidence. Amanda, the fearless leader of the attacking wings, knew one thing. If she toppled the Goblin King, she'd shatter the goblins' nerve right down to the bone. With Doreen in sight, she lunged at the king and danced out of every crushing strike. Then in one clean, lightning-fast stab, she hacked off his arm and forced him to let Doreen go. The king screamed in pure agony, and his roar ripped through the air long after it left the village. Rage flooded the Goblin King as he lunged to strike back, but Ecto moved in instantly. Amanda slammed her earth magic down to cinch the monster in a rock-solid net, and when that chance hit, she screamed for everyone to go all in and attack the Goblin King together. The combined assault smashed into the monstrous leader, and when he finally fell, his defeat lit a full-blown panic across the goblins. Once their king was dead, they scattered every which way, and the battle was over. With the fight finally ended, the village stood safe and sound. Ecto and his band of heroes marched back to Boda's gates, riding victory like a wave, and Rena burst with joy at the sight of her lord again. Sprinted over to him and wrapped him in a warm, loving hug. Amid the refugees, a man pushed to the front and declared, "I'm Raiden," the acting village chief of Bach, right up the road. Then Ecto, still wearing that noble pride, introduced himself right back. He pressed for answers about Bach's village chief and learned the truth. The goblin attacks had wiped him out, along with countless others. Their village was nearly erased, and there was no home left to go back to. When Ecto heard it, his face tightened at once. Because these weren't just strangers who needed help anymore, they'd lost everything, and his compassion kicked in instantly. The young lord promised Raiden that the refugees could settle safely in Boda, those towering walls could shield them, and the fertile land would feed them. He made it clear, though, village chief Angie's say-so was the final key. And Angie, always willing to help, immediately threw her weight behind Ecto's plan, locking it in for good. Ridden, clearly shaken by Ecto's generosity, blurted out whether the refugees could really stay. Ecto doubled down, insisting that Ridden's own approval mattered just as much, and that sudden twist sent Boda's population soaring. All these new arrivals flooded the village with fresh chances and turned it into a turning point overnight. Then, at the refugees' plea, the church from Boke village was packed up and moved to Boda as an extension of where they'd be living, setting everything up for even wilder growth to come. Bassini, once the priest of Boke, threw his heart into thanking Ecto for all he'd done, especially for letting him step back in and lead the divination ceremony again. Watching everyone rebuild and grab a brand new start lit up Ecto with satisfaction. And during a quiet talk between Ecto and Bassini, both Bassini and Boke, the door suddenly exploded open, and an anxious Rena rushed in. The young lord jolted at her surprise arrival, stared in shock and beckoned her over, reaching out to gently pull her hand closer. But Rena, visibly rattled, yanked her hand back fast, her face twisted with pure panic. Then she froze for a heartbeat. Her lips shook as she tried to get the words out, then she just started apologizing again and again, her voice trembling with regret. Ecto stared in confusion, baffled by what had dragged her into such torment. Then it clicked. Renee's fear wasn't random at all. It traced back to how she was raised as a slave. In this magical world, slaves got pushed to the margins, and they weren't allowed inside churches, a cruel rule she'd already suffered through while she lived in the capital, Grand. Ecto knew those prejudices had no home in their village, and he pushed the moment came to twist Rena's view of her brand new life. Even though she resisted, Ecto coaxed Rena to the church and begged Bassini to run a divination ritual for her. Bassini caught the young lord's meaning, nodded instantly, and snapped back that a sacred ritual like that wasn't meant for someone like her. Then drilled it into him that she wasn't a slave anymore. Ecto's words hit her like a storm, and Rena crumpled to the ground, terrified no one would ever look down on her again, tears spilling as she relived every brutal injustice from her past. Tears poured down her face as resentment melted into fresh joy, and when she realized this kindness came out of nowhere, she just couldn't stop breaking down. When Amanda and her team came back from the hunt, they got hit with the shock of a lifetime. Renee had awakened light magic powers right after the divination ritual, and Ecto wasted no time explaining that her sudden recovery magic ability was basically screaming that she had the makings of an incredible healer. With envy flickering in her eyes, Amanda bragged that healer mages were absurdly rare and worth their weight in gold. Then she saw what Renee could do and offered her a spot on her team, plus triple her current wage. But when the offer landed, Renee shot it down instantly, no hesitation at all, declaring that her real calling was to serve Ecto and making it crystal clear where her loyalty and her heart belonged. It was probably the first time Amanda had ever been met with a refusal this cold, and you could see the hurt flash across her face. So Ecto jumped in, sensed her disappointment, and steered the conversation straight to how their last hunt went. Sure, the young lord admitted food mattered, but he insisted that Amanda and Ecto's crew shouldn't grind themselves into the ground. Going too hard on a dangerous hunt could wreck their health, and Amanda nodded along, promising right then to reshuffle her schedule so everyone stayed safe and strong. Amanda leaned in and told them about what they'd just stumbled on in the forest. The orcs were rebuilding their village deeper in the woods, and her team knew they couldn't let that threat grow. After the last fight, the tracks all but screamed that the goblins had been pushed out. Now the orcs were taking root and calling it home. Ecto listened like his life depended on it, and then the truth hit him. A settlement that size usually means an orc king is hiding there too, and that kind of leader is pure danger. Amanda didn't hold back as she drove the knife deeper. Once the orcs finished setting up, they started kidnapping women to bulk up their population. She couldn't shake the terror after she rescued a woman who'd been trapped in captivity by orcs. The memory still burned bright in Amanda's mind, her heart breaking as the woman's condition looked grim, so unclear at first that nobody even knew if she was alive. Amanda rushed in anyway, holding her close and whispering that she was safe now. Still pregnant with an orc's child, she couldn't shake the trauma that haunted her, despair crashing down so hard she took her own life shortly after. Ecto and Renee were absolutely shaken by Amanda's story, furious at how those orcs crushed lives, not just by killing, but by leaving survivors to suffer, wounded with pain and scars they couldn't outrun. Orem, cheerful as ever, burst in to break the tension, insisting this time they hadn't suffered that kind of tragedy at all. With her friends watching over them, she promised it would never happen again, and Ecto nodded, impressed by how perfectly she sold the hope. Ecto spun back to the group, and with real gratitude burning in his words, thanked the adventurers for refusing to stop protecting their village. Then he announced the bombshell that a meat festival was going down in Boda that very evening. The feast turned into a total knockout. Amanda, the adventurers, and the villagers packed in together and celebrated like it was the best day ever. Cold, fresh ale poured non-stop, and the whole village cheered as heaping stacks of orc meat disappeared, like the feast itself was alive. On this bright day, everyone crowded together, laughing and celebrating like one giant family. Right in the middle of it, Ecto leaned in and told Sepha, his deadly half-elf archer, about a new twist. The refugees from Botch were about to join the hunter squad, and they'd need brutal, no-excuses training to hit the required skill level. Then Ecto made it clear, only Sepha could handle the job this time. Sepho told him the hunters were already grinding to keep pace with her brutal training. And she said her routine used weird, one-of-a-kind physical modifications that made everyone's progress explode. Ecto even brought up a past hunter who went through it and came out totally transformed, like someone swapped his whole life. The proof was undeniable, and it basically cemented Sepho as the kind of instructor people feared. Then Amanda stumbled into the room, reeking of alcohol, and blurted out why Ecto and Sepho weren't in the drinking contest with everyone else. The sharp smell of alcohol hung in the air, and Ecto immediately started freaking out about her condition, until Amanda just laughed it off, told him she was totally fine, and admitted she'd grown to actually love this village. Amanda laid out her reasons and fired up the whole room. This area was perfect for hunting every magical beast they wanted, and the village kept leveling up. She pushed Ecto to make the next move and turn Boda into a real town. Then came a long, heated back and forth between Ecto, Sepha, and Amanda about working together even more and what the village could become next. They traded plans to beef up the settlement, sharpen its defenses, and expand the infrastructure. But the night caught up with her. Too drunk to keep going, she finally passed out right in the middle of the discussion. Her face softened, sweet and childlike, totally different from the bold woman everyone knew, and it made him remember just how much she'd hated him the moment they first met. Now she'd become one of his most powerful allies. So Ecto quietly thanked Amanda, praising her rock-solid support and everything she'd done to help the village grow. Ecto and the wing squad didn't just leave. They launched on a resource-hunting expedition to keep the village growing, pushing straight into a brutal forest way down at the foot of a distant mountain range. Before they even took a step, Orem grabbed his attention and warned him that this trek would be long, hard, and dangerous, then asked, straight up, if he really had to do it. Ecto didn't hesitate. He stood firm and told her the truth. Adventurers needed him on this mission. Only an earth mage could judge the ore the right way, and Orem didn't believe anyone else could pull it off. Sure, Orem was an earth mage too, but he didn't have the muscle to handle the job. Still not buying it, Orem pointed to the iron mine near the village and asked if that wouldn't be enough. Ecto shot back that they had to keep that local mine untouched for Boda. Then Ecto finally laid it out. The real mission was to track down mithril, or any other valuable metals, to supercharge their trade, and at the same time boost their own production so they'd solve two problems in one go. Hearing that, Orem lit up and vowed to scout ahead. Then she sprinted off before anyone could grab her back, and when Ecto finally tried to warn her about the brutal incline, she was already gone. Meanwhile, Amanda sprinted up the hill, desperate to hit the summit and lock onto that breathtaking view. Before long, Orem came back fast with an urgent report, and when she carefully told Amanda that the hill they'd been climbing looked eerily like the back of a green dragon, panic exploded in her chest. So she barked orders for everyone to clear the area at once, but, unfortunately, Orm's gut instinct was dead on. When the hill started to creep and slide, it peeled back like a curtain to expose the huge, sleeping back of a green dragon, and the whole ground shook as it finally rose, looming over them. The beast was clearly pissed, roaring like it meant business and demanding to know why they'd been marching around on his massive. A ferocious head snapped toward the adventurers, those piercing eyes pinning the whole group in place, and with a thunderous roar the dragon barked, "Who are you, and what do you want?" That green dragon seethed at the sight of this unfamiliar crew and demanded, point-blank, who they were. Then Ecto realized, to his shock, he could hear the dragon's voice straight inside his own mind. It was reading his mind through telepathy. Then the young lord clocked it. Dragons weren't just smart, they could talk in perfect human language. Ecto leaned on his sharp communication skills, begging for a real truce with the giant beast. because he knew that dragon could wipe out their whole squad without even breaking a sweat. Ecto bowed a little, snapped an apology for straying across the dragon's back, and admitted they were headed through the forest to a distant mountain range. Then the dragon's piercing eyes locked onto the Earth Mage, drilling into every detail. With a sharp, curious authority in its voice, it demanded to know how someone as small as Ecto could possibly survive a forest packed with monsters that would hunt them down. Ecto steadied his nerves and snapped back with confidence, admitting he knew every nasty danger waiting in that forest. But he never expected to run into something as majestic as a dragon. Even with everything going on, Ecto couldn't help but light up with real awe. This chance to meet a legendary creature had him buzzing. And as the young mage's words stuck in its mind, the dragon straight up questioned whether Ecto could survive the journey and come back home the same way he left. Out of nowhere, the dragon blasted open its colossal wings and launched into the sky, blasting rocks and dirt that rained down on the adventurers below. And from above it boomed that if Ecto could survive the trek to the mountain range and back, it would be a truly incredible feat. It swore that if they ever pulled off that impossible feat, they'd meet again. Then the dragon vanished into the clouds, and everyone stood there in stunned silence, both awestruck and finally safe. The adventurers exploded into cheers, grateful they'd slipped out alive, and Amanda practically exhaled her relief into the air. Because yeah, she was just as thankful this didn't turn into a brawl. She knew they never could have beaten something with power like that, and with the legendary dragon still fresh in their minds, the whole group chose to press on. But Amanda, still visibly shaken, told them to stay sharper, to play it safer next time, and the squad listened fast, moving forward with eyes wide and vigilance on full blast. After a week of brutal trekking, the adventure squad finally burst out of the dense forest, and that crisp mountain breeze hit them the moment they pushed upward, colder by the minute. Ahead, the jagged peaks of the mountain range loomed like monsters, and rocky ground surrounded them on every side. So, what were they chasing? Amanda pressed Ecto on where he planned to search in a place this dead and empty, and the Earth Mage admitted he just needed time to scan the land. He'd come back with an answer once he found something promising. Then after checking the ground himself, Ecto picked a spot and unleashed his magic geological survey to probe what hid under the surface. After a little while, Ecto burst out with what he found, and Orm, the half-dwarf mage, lit up as she blurted that she could sense the precious metal too. Ecto nodded, her words were right, and the whole group went wild with excitement, especially Amanda, who suddenly realized that all that brutal trekking paid off big time, and she couldn't wait a second longer, urging them to start digging right then. Ecto pushed them to hit a cave higher on the mountain first, saying it looked like their best shot, and Amanda nodded hard, telling everyone to stay on guard. That cave could have been crawling with unknown dangers, and the climb was a brutal, rocky nightmare. Everything depended on the adventurers' mountaineering skills, until, at one terrifying moment, Orm slipped as the rock crumbled under her hand. Her heart hammered as the world tilted and she started to slip, but she snatched the next ledge at the last second, life flashing before her eyes like a warning shot. For one terrifying moment, she swore she was going to plummet. Shaken yet unbroken, Orm steadied herself and kept climbing, forcing herself not to stare into the abyss below. The team pushed forward too, fueled by the thought of priceless resources waiting inside the mountain. After a brutal climb, the adventurer crew finally clawed their way to the very top of the towering cliff. Right ahead loomed the gigantic entrance of a mysterious cave, its pitch-black depths tugging them forward, and Ecto immediately bragged that he brought torches, because of course they'd be needed here, while Amanda nodded hard, saying torches were non-negotiable for a real cave mission. Then they stepped in, and Doreen, the cautious wizard, confessed the cave sent chills up her spine, and to everyone's shock, the rest of the adventurers felt it too. As they pushed deeper, a strange chill crawled over them, and before long the crew realized something was off. Most of the tunnels looked too perfect, like they'd been carved by an artificial hand. Ecto leaned in and studied the cave walls, convinced they weren't the first footsteps down here. Then, right at the worst moment, his team hit a fork in the path and they had to pick a direction fast. She declared the left tunnel felt right and said it looked fresher, like it could lead straight to the mithril deposit. Then, the moment her words hit the air, a small rock slammed into her shoulder, and everything snapped to sudden chaos. A rough voice thundered out of the cave's dark depths, demanding to know who dared trespass. No permission, no warning, and the adventurers jerked back, snapping their torches up to spot the speaker. Shadows shifted, and out stepped a red-haired dwarf, staring at them like trouble, then waddling forward and asking who they thought they were. Ecto strode in, all confidence and respect, and proclaimed, "I'm Ecto, the Lord of Boda, right here in the kingdom of Falchiford." The dwarf's face snapped from suspicion to shock, staring at the human like he'd just seen a miracle and blurting out, "You really tore through that treacherous forest to get here." Before Ecto could even blink, the dwarf lunged forward and slammed him into a brutal, bone-rattling hug with pure dwarf power. Though it hurt like crazy, Ecto clenched his teeth and rode out that warm welcome. The dwarf threw out his name, Donovan, and lit up the place as a cheerful, high-spirited guy from the kingdom of the High Dwarves, and his grin quickly melted every bit of tension. The adventurers finally breathed out. This cave had a genuinely welcoming inhabitant after all. Donovan wasted no time, launching into his people's lifestyle with real pride. The High Dwarves spent their entire lives deep underground, and this was the first time he'd ever laid eyes on humans in person. But then the truth hit fast. Donovan wasn't the only one living here. Ecto admitted he'd heard of a dwarf race famous for raw strength and razor agility, with many of them becoming legendary blacksmiths. Still, Donovan corrected him. His High Dwarves were nothing like that. They lived for mining rare, priceless metals, mithril and adamantine, and turning them into everyday essentials. They didn't mingle much with other races, and Amanda went wide-eyed when she learned those insanely rare treasures were used for basic tools. What really broke her was that Donovan didn't seem to grasp their value at all, which only made her disbelief stronger. Then it landed. The simple pickaxe he'd crafted was worth hundreds of times more than her sword. Donovan told everyone that mithril was a tough yet feather-light metal, built to last and impossible to ignore. And at Man Team, the second strongest metal on the entire planet, right after auric alchem, was just as rare, just as prized. For Donovan and his people, these incredible metals weren't some special treasure at all, they were everyday life. Still buzzing with that unstoppable hospitality, Donovan swept the group forward and invited them to meet the rest of his people. Before they even had time to catch their breath, the adventurers stumbled into a massive underground settlement packed with towering dwarves. Donovan leading the way straight to Goggin, the clan's chief, where he proudly announced the humans who had survived the killer forest to reach their home. Soon it was clear Galgon and the other dwarves weren't even close to as welcoming as Donovan. Those wary stares whipped the air into tension, and the vibe crashed fast. Donovan looked around, confused by the hostility, and demanded to know why they were acting like this, insisting that bringing humans to their settlement was a huge, once-in-a-lifetime moment that deserved celebration. But Galgon kept glaring at the adventurers. With a booming, furious voice, Galgon demanded to know why they'd shown up at his people's home uninvited, then snapped that this land belonged to the High Dwarves, and the adventurers had just walked into a disaster. No matter what they meant or what they answered, he swore they'd never be able to crawl back to where they came from. Ecta froze at the brutal hostility pouring out of Galgon, the dwarves' leader. Warm hospitality wasn't even on the table. No way were they getting that kind of welcome. Maybe it was just how dwarves acted, and maybe Donovan was the odd one out because his soft heart wouldn't let him treat people coldly. Amanda felt the tension snap in the air and braced herself for a brawl. But Ecto shot in fast and soothed everything down, telling her not to do a single unnecessary thing and that the situation was already in hand. Then he turned back to Galgon and laid it out. Their one goal was to find a vein of valuable ore. With a calm politeness, he asked whether the dwarves would let them get a mining license. Galgon erupted into roaring laughter, mocking the very idea. He declared the dwarves had stood guard on this mountain for generations, and every Orvan inside it belonged, lock, stock, and soul, to the High Dwarves. Ecto said it straight. Handing mining rights to outsiders was the craziest idea he'd ever heard, but he kept his cool and swore he wasn't coming to steal by force. He wanted a clean, fair deal that benefited both sides, and that snapped Galgon's focus. Right then, for the first time, the head dwarf actually looked interested. Ecto pressed on, promising to open access to the supplies his team could bring, and in return the dwarves would let them mine, because even if he wasn't sure what other real mines lurked nearby, locking something like this in place was the key to Boda Village's future. Galgon had to tread carefully, or he'd risk pushing the dwarves even farther away. Then, just as the proposal started to sink in, distant shouts ripped the moment away. A shaking dwarf burst into the chamber, screaming that doom had struck. A killer spider had moved into the depths of the cave, and it had snatched several dwarf children. Worse still, its nest sat high above the cavern floor, dead out of reach. Ecto and the adventurers saw their opening to fix things with the dwarves, and they swore to tackle that deadly spider and bring the kids back. Meanwhile, the monstrous creature wrapped the kidnapped dwarf children in thick cocoons, sealing them up like raw supplies for its next move. The adventurers quickly cornered the spider, and Amanda, straight up fearless, sprinted in swinging her greatsword. But it barely scratched that massive exoskeleton. Then Sifa dove forward and unleashed a volley of arrows, yet every shot still bounced off like nothing. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Ecto pushed himself forward and slammed his earth magic into the ground, carving solid ledges so he could scramble up toward the cocoons, until he finally reached the trapped kids and realized his sword couldn't slice through the spider's web. The strands were brutally strong, locking them in place, and the moment the spider sensed danger, it snapped its focus to Ecto and charged to strike. It splattered sticky webbing across his arm, yanking it pinned in place and leaving him nearly powerless. Right when things looked hopeless, an axe crashed down and sliced the spider's webbing clean. Ecto burst free. He spun around to see Donovan, the red-haired dwarf, already poised to strike again, and Ecto blurted out his thanks for saving him. Donovan shrugged it off and said those threads were so stretchy that normal weapons wouldn't even make a dent. Then he thrust his own mithril axe forward, milled from one of the toughest materials on Earth, way stronger than anything the other adventurers had. Seeing how brutally effective that axe was, Ecto ordered the adventurers to ditch their old gear and draw mithril weapons. Feeling like victory finally had a key, they unleashed their coordinated attack with brand new tools, racing to save the kids and wipe out the monstrous spiders. While Ecto, Donovan, and the adventurers tore through the swarm, spider by spider, until freed the dwarf children, tiny hearts bursting with joy, so they bolted back to their parents, who hugged them tight, tears of gratitude spilling everywhere. With the spiders wiped out and the threat finally gone, the adventurers erupted in celebration, proving yet again they could crush even the scariest monsters. And while the victory cheers rolled on, Ecto and Donovan kept closing the gap, laughing over what they'd pulled off and tightening the bond between the adventurers and the dwarves. With the killer spider finally wiped out, Head Galgon marched up to Ecto with his head bowed, apologized for his earlier harsh words, and admitted the truth. His people couldn't have faced that nightmare without the adventurers. Then, speaking for every high dwarf, he poured out heartfelt gratitude for rescuing the captured children. Ecto, steady and sharp, told Galgon, "Your win wouldn't exist without mithril weapons," because the adventurers' own gear had failed the moment it mattered. Then he pounced on the opening to make one more request. Ecto explained that his village was starving for mithril, but promised Galgon they'd use it wisely, and he pushed for a fair trade deal between the dwarves and Boda. Galgon, moved by Ecto's sincerity, lit up and told him straight. Ecto was honest, fascinating, and absolutely someone he could trust. With a rough, dwarven bear hug, Galgon seized the young lord and proclaimed they'd throw a massive feast to celebrate. The night rolled on with songs and drinks, but then the head dwarf slammed a condition on the table. If Ecto could outdrink him during the festivities, he'd even think about starting trade talks, and once the challenge landed, Ecto's stomach dropped because he knew that drink-off was going to be brutal. He knew dwarves were legendary for refusing to get knocked out, downing absurd amounts of alcohol and still standing tall like it was nothing. Then the feast hit like a thunderclap. Music rang through the cavern, bonfires blazed, and the dwarves belted out songs so loud the walls seemed to shake, while the adventurers dug in, stuffing themselves with that incredible hospitality and gaping at the dwarves' wild, non-stop energy. Galgon laid out the brutal truth of life in those mountain caves. No matter how much alcohol they had, the cold would always win. So he pitched a deal. The dwarves would hand over mithril, and they'd pay them with strong liquor. Ecto couldn't help but bite at the idea, even if his village was running dry, because with Albedo backing them up, they could finally build a steady supply and keep up with the dwarves' demands. Ecto nodded and sealed the deal, turning Boda and the high dwarves into trading partners with one blazing treaty. Galgon didn't let his promise slip. He warned Ecto that the deal would only get sealed if Ecto could outdrink him. Saying no would have shattered the delicate negotiations, so Ecto had no choice but to dive into the contest. And right away he learned the dwarves didn't even touch glasses. They grabbed bottles and slammed back huge gulps straight from the bottle. That first brutal sip of strong booze hit him with a disgusting punch, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. Then the next drinks started tasting better, and before long Ecto was gulping it down while Galgon stayed way ahead, already downing an insane stack of bottles. Still, for all that lead, it was obvious the head dwarf was getting visibly drunk. Hours dragged by, the tower of empty bottles kept piling higher, and everyone was shocked. First down went Galgon. He crumpled into a deep, heavy sleep. The adventurers erupted with cheers over Ecto's totally unexpected win. Amanda lauded him, straight up admitting she never thought he'd pull it off, and then Ecto, pale as a ghost and obviously sick. He barely clung to his feet, crashed into Amanda, And then nausea hit so hard he finally gave in. Ecto spent a miserable, endless night fighting it off. But once he caught a break, he slipped into sleep. The very next morning, Ecto jolted awake with a brutal headache and a nasty hangover. Then his eyes widened when he realized he and his whole troop were still trapped up in the mountains. The adventure pushed on, and just moments later, a brutal roar thundered out of a new cave they'd found. Ecto's instincts kicked in instantly, shouting that everyone stay sharp, because there were zero signs of any hired dwarves nearby, and they couldn't afford to rush. Donovan quickly slid into the squad, scanning every corner of the surroundings while the rest of the group finally caught their breath. With wide-eyed curiosity, he blurted, "Why is everyone up so early?" Ecto said they'd been jolted awake by that brutal rumble and roar from earlier. Donovan just chuckled and waved it off. No big deal. The sound, he insisted, was probably the dwarves breaking through hard rocks in their mines, using blasting tricks the adventurers didn't know. Right on cue, a dwarf popped in carrying strange little devices, announcing they were explosive charges, and then he promised a first-hand demonstration. Donovan had the charges set in precise spots, then barked for everyone to take cover, while Ecto watched, buzzing with curiosity and a little adrenaline, not knowing what was coming. Donovan caught his anticipation and told him to hold tight. Right after, the dwarf who'd planted the charges came sprinting back and dove behind cover. Then, boom. A deafening blast ripped through the cave, shaking the whole place and raining rocks down like thunder. The travelers reeled from the raw force, gasping just to get their senses back, while Donovan, stone-calm, declared the blast worked and shrugged that they should keep digging. For Ecto, the whole thing slammed him with déjà vu, like dynamite back in his old life in Japan. Recently, he kept getting these vivid dreams of that strange place, flooded with memories of technologies and methods that felt totally foreign, yet weirdly familiar. And he couldn't stop asking himself where the dwarves even found techniques that advanced. Meanwhile, Amanda and Orem were blown away, staring in disbelief at the explosion's raw force and praising the dwarves' brilliant ingenuity. Amanda even said that kind of tech could change everything, not only for mining, but for fighting monsters too. And Doreen, the fire sorceress, was just as stunned by their blasting tricks, swearing the blast power looked like it crushed pure magic. She boldly claimed that even a dragon probably wouldn't survive that kind of force, unexpectedly. Doreen blurted out that she'd make an explosion way tougher than the dwarf's dynamite, and Amanda snapped into action to shut it down fast, before things got deadly, only to find out Doreen wasn't chasing disaster at all. She just wanted proof that her magic could hit just as hard as his tech. Ecto leaned in and reassured her, saying her fire magic was already stronger than any explosion, and that somehow soothed the competitive sorceress. At the same time, Donovan cracked the truth. The dwarves didn't invent this blasting style at all. It was an ancient technique, handed down from their ancestors and guarded like treasure, and by their rules only the high dwarves were allowed to know how to use it. Ecto couldn't stop the thought that maybe this tech had been introduced by a reincarnated human like himself, because the precision and know-how felt way beyond what he'd seen so far. In the end, Ecto had to admit it. The dwarves were smart to keep this method locked away. If people messed with that kind of power, the fallout could be brutal. Then, as they pushed deeper into the cave, Ecto caught sight of something weird, adamantine, a blazing, embedded chunk of one of the rarest, toughest metals on Earth. Donovan practically froze, stunned, and said this find inside a mine like this was pure, insane luck. Ecto's eyes lit up. Maybe he could use what he knows to refine adamant in the same way he processed iron ore, if he could just crack its exact composition. The adventurers gaped at the glittering ore, something they'd only ever heard about in legends. Donovan leaned in and said explosions often blast rare stuff loose from inside the rocks, and that's how you stumble on treasures you never saw coming. Then Donovan turned to Ecto's and asked to inspect his sword. After a close look at the blade, he saw it was wrecked from the killer spider fight the day before. Still usable, but barely, like it was one hit away from dying for good. Donovan, buzzing with excitement, vowed he'd forge Ecto a fresh sword, and even better, one made of adamantine. Ecto stared, stunned, then asked Donovan straight up, was he serious? That red-haired dwarf swore the gesture was his own way of thanking Ecto for rescuing the dwarf kids, and Donovan immediately promised he'd forge brand-new mithril weapons for every adventurer. True to his word, Donovan got to work right away, and the adventurers watched in awe as he poured his hard-earned skill into forging their weapons. When Ecto finally unveiled the finished pieces, the whole crowd froze in stunned silence, especially his brand-new sword, a true masterpiece. The way it balanced, the razor edge, the insane craftsmanship, it left him speechless. With the blade in his hands, Ecto admitted it was the finest sword he'd ever laid eyes on, then poured out his gratitude like he meant it. Donovan, basking in the praise, crowned it one of his proudest creations. The adventurers were just as fired up about their new mithril weapons, jaw-dropped at how gorgeous and deadly they looked, and how fast they'd been forged. Amanda even stepped forward and declared that with gear like this, their team would get sharper, faster, and deadlier with every battle. After they gathered their supplies, Ecto stumbled back to the head of the High Dwarves, Galgon, and found him wrecked with a brutal hangover. He pressed his aching temples and confessed it was the very first time he'd ever passed out from drinking. Ecto had actually outdrunk him, so the trade deal got sealed for real, official. Then Galgon, king of the High Dwarves, promised to hand over mithril in exchange for the finest human alcohol. The chief dwarf admitted he had zero clue about the going prices for alcohol, but he was ready to trust Ecto. Still, he warned Ecto, "Don't you dare lowball mithril, because that metal is brutally rare and expensive." Ecto nodded and promised that humans all overprized mithril, so he'd deliver top-shelf alcohol in huge, generous amounts. To lock it in, Galgon barked an order and had his people shove mithril ore into the travelers' bags. Before they split up, he cornered Ecto and demanded a promise. Next time, they were settling their legendary drinking contest for good, while Galgon staggered around with a brutal hangover, admitting it was the very first time he'd ever blacked out from alcohol. Since Ecto had finally outdrunk him, the trade was locked in for real. Galgon, the High Dwarves' leader, would ship mithril, and in return he'd get the finest human booze. The chief dwarf admitted he had zero clue what alcohol was worth, but he decided to trust Ecto's gut. Then he barked that Ecto better not lowball mithril, because it's razor-rare and insanely expensive. Ecto swore mithril was prized by humans and promised to load the traveler with top-shelf alcohol in huge amounts. So Galgon had his people cram the bags with mithril ore, demanded Ecto's promise to repeat their legendary drinking contest someday, and then, turning on Donovan, declared that Donovan would never be allowed to drink alcohol again. It hit Donovan like a flashback to their earlier talk. His usual grin vanished, and when he faced Ecto, seriousness snapped into place as he told him, straight from the heart, just how much he valued his spot among the High Dwarves. But he admitted meeting Ecto and his crew flipped his whole worldview. After all, humans he ran into lit a spark in him, and it made him beg Ecto for permission to tag along to Boda, while Donovan swore he'd level up as a blacksmith and help Ecto build up the village. Seeing Donovan's unmatched blacksmith skills, Ecto didn't hesitate. He nodded and agreed right away because he knew a master like that could be a lifeline for the village, and he swore the villagers would thank them for it. As the travelers packed up to head home, Orem smiled and promised he'd come back to the dwarves' lands again soon. Meanwhile, Galgon pulled Donovan aside and demanded he tag along with Ecto on the next visit, then grinned and swore he'd get payback on Ecto in their next drinking contest. Ecto just laughed it off and promised the chief he'd give him another shot, anytime, even if it meant losing again. But Amanda remembered how wrecked Ecto was after their last showdown and quietly figured it was safer to steer clear of that disaster next time. Fresh mithril packed and Donovan finally in their corner, Ecto and the crew tore off from Bulker's main peak with their heads high. Because that brutal trek into the mountains didn't just survive them, it pulled them new allies from the High Dwarves, and now the future was looking bright. The road back home once again dragged the group straight through the deadly forest, and they tiptoed forward with sharp, cautious eyes until 3 saber-toothed panthers burst into their path. But this time the squad didn't flinch. Their newly forged mithril weapons were ready, and they fought back like they couldn't lose. They chose to face the beasts head-on instead of running, keeping every eye on their backs because they were closing in on Green Dragon Hill. Because the last thing any of them wanted was to trigger the powerful creature they'd already met. While they crept through the forest, Ecto couldn't shake the Green Dragon's promise from before. Someday they'd meet again. And even with that thought hanging over him, he knew nobody wanted to provoke something that massive. There was no safety net, no guarantee they'd survive a second run-in. So the young lord forced himself to think smart, plotting a route with plain, careful sense to cut down the danger at every step. Amanda caught Ecto lost in thought, and finally asked what he was burning his brain over. Before he could even get a word out, Donovan crashed in and tore the plan apart. Then the red-haired dwarf swaggered up and insisted the saber-toothed panthers they'd just met were totally harmless, basically nothing but oversized kittens begging to be welcomed. Before anyone could even blink, a swift panther exploded forward and slammed into Donovan, hurling him aside with brutal force. The rest of the pack snapped into action the moment they saw it. Now it was fight time, no question about it. The adventurers steadied up, trusting their shiny new mithril weapons, while Amanda, the fearless leader, launched forward first. With razor-sharp, perfectly timed strikes, she dropped the saber-toothed panthers at shocking speed. So fast even Ecto couldn't help but stare, stunned by Amanda's sheer strength, agility, and ruthless efficiency as she tore through those ferocious beasts. When the fight finally died down, the crew swooped up the magic stones the slain panthers left behind. Then Ecto snapped that piling on extra weight would just drag them to a crawl. With the forest still dangerous and them hovering too close to the green dragon's territory, he pushed for a bypass and 0 more fights. Amanda immediately backed him, barking orders to her squad to go full speed and keep everyone alive. Little Orm lugging that heavy sack looked like she'd finally get to breathe, and Donovan clocked her struggle at once, then swept in to help, even praising her as a beautiful girl who shouldn't have to carry that weight. And next thing everyone knew, Donovan didn't just take one sack. He seized all the mithril packs and sprinted ahead like it was nothing. His sudden burst of speed slammed into the group so hard they went silent, stunned, and frozen. Then Cepha was the first to snap out of it and shout. Amanda stared in shock too, as Donovan faced furious accusations that he'd run off to steal their precious mithril. Without wasting a second, he slammed into pursuit, dead set on stopping the red-haired dwarf and yanking back their valuable cargo. Ecto, still reeling from what just happened, tore into Amanda's ears, shouting that they were barreling straight into the green dragon's territory. Yet she either didn't hear him or refused to care, because all she had in her sights was Donovan. Amanda was locked in, eyes blazing with one mission: catch Donovan and reclaim the mithril, and hand the dwarf a hard, stern lesson about loyalty and trust. Amanda launched right back into her relentless sprint after Donovan, stunned that the dwarf could move that fast even while hauling heavy sacks of mithril ore. For her, getting the cargo back wasn't just about practicality. It was pure honor, until her chase finally got cut off hard. When an earth-shaking roar tore through the forest, the birds exploded into the sky. The whole forest went dead silent as the green dragon stepped into view. Then it dropped from above, glaring down at the chaos below, and when it finally clocked the travelers, it rumbled that it had been waiting for their return. What came next left Ecto, Amanda, and the whole team in total shock. Because Donovan didn't run away at all. He sprinted straight up to the green dragon and hugged it like a long-lost friend, wrapping that massive beast in a tender, warm embrace. Stunned, Ecto blurted out whether Donovan really knew that dragon. Then the red-haired dwarf practically burst with pride, saying the green dragon was worshipped by the high dwarves as a forest deity. Donovan claimed the dragon let them hunt there, so they thanked it with surprise mithril gifts. Even so, Amanda didn't buy it. She snapped that Donovan had stolen the mithril and bolted, and the poor, well-meaning dwarf instantly realized how bad that sounded. He apologized again and again, swearing he'd just been so hyped to see the dragon that he'd blanked on everything else in his rush. His raw sincerity wiped out every doubt Ecto had about Donovan's honesty. The green dragon snapped his head toward Ecto, smirking that his trip to the high dwarves had to have gone perfectly, and Ecto gladly told the whole story of Mount Bulker, how that journey forged a stronger bond between Boda and the high dwarves. Then the dragon stepped in with a bold promise, praising Donovan as the kindest, most straightforward dwarf it had ever met, insisting his motives were clean and there was 0 reason for anyone to doubt him. With goodwill in his heart, Ecto let Donovan hand over half the mithril they'd carried to the green dragon, making Donovan beam with joy, even as Doreen, the fiery sorceress, exploded in protest. She screamed that giving away that much of their precious cargo was a mistake, and Ecto, cool-headed and sharp-eyed, calmly urged her to look at the bigger picture. He broke it down. The green dragon was the reason the forest stayed balanced and easy to cross. Without it, their journey would have turned brutal fast. Then Ecto drove the point home, reminding everyone how Donovan's generosity kept them going and how he'd forged those incredible weapons just for them. His logic shut the debate down for good, and even Doreen had to give in, reluctant as ever. The adventurers stared, jaws hanging, as the colossal dragon gobbled down the mithril like it was pure heaven. Then, when it was done, it actually thanked Ecto for the tasty treat. Ecto's young lord promised he'd bring more mithril the next time he came back from Mount Bulker, and Donovan, beyond ecstatic, told the dragon he'd decided to live among humans in Boda. The dragon's eyes widened at the announcement, and it admitted that a high dwarf picking this path was totally unexpected, but it still respected its friend's call. Right before they split, the dragon promised Ecto that if danger ever crept through the forest again, it would stand guard. Then, as a last punch to seal the moment, the green dragon quietly shared part of its own strength with Ecto, and their bond finally went beyond words. Then it wheeled toward the young lord and squeezed out its last request. Make sure Donovan was safe, because it truly adored him. At last, the travelers burst free from the deadly forest and headed back to their home village, Boda. As soon as they came in sight, Rena sprinted out first and launched herself into Ecto's arms, crushing him in a burst of pure joy. His return lit up her whole face, and that reunion hit the heart like a warm, unforgettable hug. Once Rena finally calmed down, she spotted Donovan and leaned in, curious as hell. So who are you? The red-haired dwarf tipped his head and introduced himself as a high dwarf, then boasted he was dead set on becoming the best blacksmith in the village. Gherkin, the local blacksmith, shoved forward, just as thrilled as everyone at Donovan's arrival, then admitted, I'm good with my hands, but I'd be honored to learn the high dwarf's techniques. And Donovan, always smiling, nodded and agreed to take Gherkin as his very first human apprentice. Sifa didn't waste a second. She straight up asked if Donovan could upgrade the hunting party's weapons, and the dwarf swore he'd do his best while demanding the exact specs. Orem then stepped in with the spiderweb she'd snatched from the gnome cave, offering it as crafting material, and that insane web strength was perfect for beefing up Sifa's bow. So when the work paid off, she was genuinely grateful for the gift. Sifa thanked Orm from the bottom of her heart, and the adventurers finally slid back into their usual grind. Donovan stayed behind with Renee while the rest of the crew rushed off to Kay's store. The cat-girl manager lit up the moment they delivered the mithril ore, thanking them again and again like it was pure gold. Her curiosity went into overdrive, and Kay pressed for the exact vein where it was found. But Ecto, paranoid as always, just smirked and said it was a secret. Ecto needled him by dubbing him a cunning lord, then broke into laughter and steered the talk straight to one thing, pricing. He told them mithril shipments would start rolling in on schedule. But to seal the deal, they needed a steady stash of strong liquor, and Kay agreed, only to confess there was one tiny problem. She said the store was short on cash for big deliveries, so she had to run it by Albedo for approval. Ecto even told her to pass along his regards and ask for a hefty alcohol shipment. Kate nodded, promised she'd take care of it, and hurried back to her work. With the business finally wrapped up, Ecto tore back home, washed over by pure relief. He sank into that hot, soothing bath, then tore into a mouth-watering dinner Rena cooked, and after. He finally crashed onto the bed he'd been craving all this long journey, and the familiar comfort hit harder than ever. Ecto sank into sleep, relishing that sweet, peaceful feeling of being home. Right as sleep started to creep in, Ecto felt something soft brush against him, and a sweet, soothing scent hit his nose. He cracked his eyes open, and the moment he saw Renee sprawled beside him, the sleep instantly vanished. Startled, he blurted out what she was doing, and when Rena's cheeks flared with embarrassment, she apologized in a tiny voice. Then confessed she'd missed him like crazy while he was gone, and she only meant to sit there and watch his sleeping face. Unable to fight it anymore, she ended up snuggling up beside him, and Ecto quickly reassured Rena, telling her not to torture herself because nothing bad had happened at all. Waking up and finding her right there, inches from him, hit like a shock. Yet the devoted girl immediately apologized again, then begged for some attention, practically glowing with how happy she was to have her master back, and his heart started pounding so hard it was obvious. Rin joked it was just reunion excitement. They spent forever drilling into every detail of Ecto's trek to the Hidwarv's cave, and as they relived those wild moments, their bond tightened until it felt unbreakable. Then, finally, they kicked back together, satisfied, calm, and fast asleep. A few days later, the merchant Albedo rolled into Boda, and Ecto greeted his old friend with open arms, then hurriedly apologized for making him trek all that way. But Albedo just grinned, saying he was thrilled to be here, because Kay had sent him a message about the mithril trade, and he decided to personally drop off a shipment of alcohol. Ecto thanked him for being so quick, praising how perfectly the delivery came at the right moment. Albedo watched Ecto crush it in mining that rare metal and instantly started picturing piles of profit. Then he leaned in and demanded to know if Ecto had stumbled on a fresh mithril mine, but Ecto froze, debating whether he should spill the whole truth. After a heartbeat, he spilled the truth about the deadly trek to Mount Boker, but he swore Albedo to keep it locked up. The merchant nodded and praised Ecto's guts for charging into that kind of danger, saying trips like this were normally saved for hardened veterans. Ecto, staring back on the journey, admitted the truth. Going back into the dwarf's cave again and again through that same deadly route was way too dangerous. He pitched a savage plan, dig an underground tunnel straight from Boda to the mine, and then dropped the bombshell. Only he and the 5 adventurers knew the mine's exact spot, so the mithril they could grab would be capped by what they could haul out. Albedo, never one to panic, shrugged at the limit and said even a tiny stash of mithril could still cash out in a massive fortune. Until, of course, he laid down one condition. Ecto flat-out refused to negotiate mithril trade with anyone else, while Albedo would pay every transport cost and slash prices on the villagers' essentials. Ecto grinned and teased, "You doubt me." And Albedo shot back that he didn't, because Ecto was the only merchant he trusted and knew. Then, as a show of good faith, Ecto swore they'd be exclusive, promising to deal with Albedo alone. Thrilled to lock it in, Albedo practically tasted victory. Then wasted no time, scribbling the contract that made her the one and only supplier of mithril. With a single signature, Ecto sealed the trade deal, and suddenly broke free, rising to the power of a feudal lord. The deal let him run his business without asking his father for permission, and when Ecto stared at what was coming, he felt the pressure mount. He had to sell the mithril fast, clean, and at a big profit, because the second that rare metal hit the market, the whole world would come sniffing around, so he'd need sharp planning to dodge trouble and still make sure Boda got every last benefit. Just a few months after the mithril trade kicked off, it exploded so fast that the Chancellor of the Falkshireford Kingdom took one look and panicked over the sudden shakeup in the market. The Chancellor pushed to track down what was causing it, and he had ironclad proof. Mithril turnover across the kingdom had suddenly skyrocketed. But the truth behind this rare metal still hid in the shadows. So the Chancellor snapped into action and ordered his people to dig deeper until it was all they could think about. But every trail led to nothing. The only thing they could confirm was terrifying. The mithril trade was exploding, with fresh amounts showing up every single day. The supply routes were scattered on purpose, so finding them felt impossible. No matter where they looked, one thread kept popping up. Everyone talked about the Albedo Trading Company. And there was one region that kept showing up in the records over and over. Rand Glenred sprawled endlessly while Merchant Albedo seemed to drop in again and again. Meanwhile, Chancellor Mauld wrestled with the baffling mystery. A calm, familiar voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Lily, his granddaughter, stepped into the room, and just like that, the heavy weight on his chest lifted. Lily Ann, the Chancellor's beloved granddaughter, was pure sunshine in human form, chasing away even the darkest thoughts. And while she was there, the maddening mystery of the mithril trade finally felt like it could wait. When the Chancellor spotted his granddaughter still up, he snapped, "Why are you awake this late?" Lillian's beauty glowed even in the dim light as she confessed, "I can't sleep. I've been battling insomnia." She admitted her heart wouldn't rest because she kept worrying about her grandfather, who looked weaker every single day. Alonso tried to calm her down, insisting he was fine, but that lately his head had been buried in urgent business. That latest case hit like a truck, serious enough to swallow every ounce of his time and energy. So Lily worried, and he promised her he'd talk everything out with her, then swore he wouldn't tell a single soul. Alonso's sharp attention snapped to her. Her sincerity and brainpower caught him mid-thought. The matter wasn't locked behind classified walls, but it was tangled, and maybe her fresh eyes could finally untie the knot. So Alonso started laying it out. The capital's markets had been flooded with an abnormal surge of mithril, rare metal, all at once. Lillian, innocent as ever, lit up and said it sounded amazing, because suddenly everyone could buy as much as they wanted. The Chancellor flashed a tired grin and said, "It's not that simple," then explained that every lord was supposed to report any new mine to the government. But nobody filed a single report, and that weird silence screamed for a deep investigation. Lillian tried to connect the dots when they asked if the mine owners would hesitate to report it, because snitching would slash their profits, until Alonso snapped in and said no, helping the government would pay off big. Anyone who uncovered a mithril mine would rake in serious money, get royal praise, and become a legend across the whole kingdom. And when Lillian finally said it still didn't add up, there had to be another reason. Alonso leaned in, explaining that the Albedo Trading Company, the firm handling the mithril distribution, funneled most of its business straight through Rand Glenred. What made this so damn intriguing, Alonso kept talking, was the map of the Glenreid domain. Because the only real settlement there was Boda, a village boxed in on three sides by thick, almost impossible forest, built to cash in on the wood's resources, until that grand plan collapsed and left Boda stunted, worn out, and nearly deserted. Alonso started connecting the dots, thinking all this recent activity might be a sign of a secret mithril deposit. Maybe even the kind that Rand Glenreid, the landowner, had no clue about at all. And if that was true, someone else could have unearthed the mine, kicked off the trade in secret with Albedo, and never once told the crown. Lillian leaned in, eyes sharp, and drank in every single detail like it was life or death. Her grandfather's deductions splashed a mind-bending picture across the table. So many clues, but still no real answers about where the mithril truly came from. The Chancellor clenched his jaw over a brutal choice. Tell the king and risk everything, or keep digging in silence. Then Lillian cut through his thoughts and fired a question. Isn't there border control near the village of Boda to watch for weird stuff like this? Her grandfather froze for a beat, then said border controls could work. The catch? To set it up, they'd need the written permission of the local Margrave, Rand Glen Reed. Alonso also laid out the danger. If the mithril case ever hit the public, it could throw the whole supply of that precious metal into chaos, and he wasn't about to let that happen. Then Lillian's eyes lit up with pride as she blurted that she had a plan to help. Her grandfather, fully trusting her sharp mind, told her he'd never once doubted her and urged her to spill the idea. Lillian paused, buzzing with excitement, but she knew her proposal might rattle him, so she took a deep breath and pushed forward. She declared she'd go to Boda herself, hiding her real identity, and Alonso just froze, instantly regretting telling his granddaughter any of this. Her wild reaction now felt like a ticking time bomb. Lillian, though, stood there with full confidence, expecting her grandfather to clap for her brilliant plan. The Chancellor knew her better than anyone. Once Lillian decided something, no one could talk her out of it. This time it was no different. Lillian clenched her resolve and refused to back down, determined to pry open the secrets of Boda's mithril trade and finally make everything make sense. She swore to crack the mystery for her grandfather, declaring her mission out loud. Uncover the truth behind Boda Village's shadowy mithril business, no matter what trials waited ahead. Meanwhile, Boda's mithril mining operation kept booming, and Donovan couldn't help but marvel. Thanks to the brand-new underground tunnel, hauling the ore got dramatically easier. Orem, all business and zero nonsense, immediately loved how the tunnel shaved off time by dodging the deadly surface routes between the village and the mountain range. Sepha noticed it too, praising the tunnel's efficiency, because with no monsters waiting to ambush them, she could pour all her focus into hauling the cargo instead of fighting off threats. That tunnel stretched about 10 kilometers straight from Boda village to the mountain range, and Ecto, always thinking ahead, had built 3 rest stops so the trip wouldn't crush anyone, plus a secret side passage to the Green Dragon's domain, letting him deliver the promised share of mithril, or reach the mighty creature, without a hitch. To keep the tunnel working, Ecto built a ventilation system with air openings every 500 meters, feeding it fresh airflow non-stop. And for light, he lined the walls with glowing vegetation, natural lamps all the way through. Plus, he could always fall back on torches if the darkness demanded more. True to his promise to the High Dwarves, Ecto kept hauling in top shelf, strong alcohol for every trade deal, and that kept the village and the dwarves locked in tight. For Albedo, the payoff was massive. Because of that exclusive agreement, he shot up to become the kingdom's one supplier of mithril, drowning in both wealth and prestige. Running the whole operation wasn't child's play, but after 2 straight months of non-stop grind, the results hit like a drum roll. The mithril trade boomed and Boda village finally started cashing in on all that hard work, growing faster with every day. The moment Ecto and the adventurers crawled out of that tunnel, the crew split up. While the adventurers hauled the mithril off to a secret underground vault, Ecto thanked them and headed back to the village. But as he neared the settlement, something strange caught his eye. A horse-drawn carriage slid into the village, way too slick, way too polished for these rustic streets. Ecto stared, curious but exhausted, and dragged himself onward, only wanting to finally rest. When he got home, Rena told him the truth. The carriage had delivered a messenger from the Viscount's side, a steward from the neighboring territory, who'd been waiting at Chief Angie's place while Ecto was gone. That surprise visit sparked Ecto's curiosity. He didn't know the Viscount at all, and he couldn't remember ever getting a single letter from him before, so he snatched it up and read it right away. In it, this count marched up and congratulated him for Boda Village's unbelievable growth and booming prosperity. The letter came in hot, begging him to visit the village in person, along with his daughter, and then. Ecto couldn't shake the bigger message behind it all. His legendary Earth Mage reputation had somehow already reached the capital, yet his father never once admitted that Ecto had been kicked out to the kingdom's outskirts. That silence screamed that Viscount's friendly visit wasn't just small talk. If all he wanted was to watch Boda grow, he wouldn't waste a trip in person. With things between Ecto and his father already frayed, the visit had to be happening quietly, far from Rand Glenreed's eyes, and Ecto started weighing what that could mean. Viscount Advance might have caught the weirdness in the mithril trade and linked it straight to Boda village, especially if he'd traced Albedo's trading routes and figured out how it all tied back to Boda. So yeah, the guy seemed sharp and watchful, but even with all that worry, Ecto stayed perfectly calm. That mithril was locked away in a secret underground vault, buried so deep that finding it felt nearly impossible. So Ecto didn't panic at all. He saw this visit as his chance to forge a brand new bond. Without wasting a second, Ecto drafted a formal invitation and sent it to the Viscount, urging him to come to Boda, while making it crystal clear he couldn't wait to host the Viscount and his daughter. The messenger bolted off right away to deliver the letter, and just a few days later, Renat practically burst into Ectos's room, shouting that a horse-drawn carriage had rolled in, backed by a cavalry detachment, and Ectos immediately knew it could only be the invited Viscount. The young lord stayed cool and told them a big-shot visitor had arrived, then ordered the gates thrown open. Captain Ed of the hunting party, ever cautious, just waited for Ecto's signal before he made a move. As soon as the gates cracked open, Ecto stepped out to greet the guests, introduced himself, and threw open the doors, welcoming them to the Boda village. The visitors staggered in surprise at the settlement's brutal defenses, because those towering stone walls and iron-solid gates didn't look like something a village of Boda's size should ever have. The attendants riding with the carriage couldn't stop staring in awe, and the first girl out the door looked just as stunned. She stared at the outer wall and blurted that it was way too solid for some little village on the kingdom's edge. With eyes wide, she asked if Lord Ecto had personally overseen building a fortress like this. Ecto explained it plain. Boda village was hemmed in on three sides by a brutal, impenetrable forest. Without that wall, monsters would keep spilling in, so this was the settlement's very first priority. Enraptured by his explanation, the girl pressed him again. Wait, are you really the lord of this place? Ecto finally admitted it. He really was the lord of Boda village. And when Lillian stared at him like she was reading a hidden script, her suspicions snapped into place. All of the Chancellor's worries about the mithril trade suddenly pointed straight at this quiet young man. Even with all her confidence blazing, she couldn't stop herself from scrutinizing Ecto's innocent vibe, because it made him look like he had absolutely nothing to do with the secret rare metal trade. Lillian, fueled by pure determination, decided to tear into the truth behind Ecto and why mithril was piling up in such insane amounts. Then her thoughts snapped when another figure spilled out of the carriage. The Viscount himself, who immediately clocked his daughter's total lack of decorum. He gently urged her to introduce herself and show a bit more manners, then turned to Ecto and apologized for his daughter's rudeness, blaming it on exhaustion from their long trip. Lillian blushed, fixed her attitude on the spot, and suddenly became way more polite and friendly. Ecto, still as gracious as ever, brushed off her earlier snappiness, told them Boda wasn't exactly anything special, but insisted their visit would be worth it. Then she thanked Ecto for hosting them and begged him to take care of their every need while they were there. Right as the guests finally settled in, the guards snapped to attention and shouted that monsters were closing in. Straight from the main road, a pack of dire wolves barreled toward the settlement. Ecto didn't even flinch. He slammed the order to shut the main gate at once and started barking out defenses. Lillian stared at the young lord, hooked by how fast and fearless he moved. Then Ecto barked for the hunters, thrusting them with the crucial job of steering the archers against the danger closing in. And the hunters' commanding shout immediately rang out as they ordered the archers to open fire. Arrows tore out of the city walls like a storm, hammering the dire wolves with ruthless precision, until those hunters had turned the whole pack into nothing more than the monsters' last, fading moments. Meanwhile, this Count's carriage swept through the main gate just in time, and the guards slammed it shut behind them, locking the wolves out behind an unbreakable wall. The Viscount let out a breath of relief and poured out his gratitude to Ecto, admitting that if the young lord hadn't snapped into action and led so well, everything would have gone terribly wrong. Then he admitted, still stunned, how organized Boda's men seemed, until Ecto gently corrected him. They weren't guards at all, just a band of local hunters. He told them these hunters took turns on the wall, ready to swat down monster attacks before they reached the village. Then a report snapped in. The dire wolves were completely wiped out by a hunter. The guests were blown away by the hunters' speed and skill, but Lillian's sharp eyes caught something off in an instant. Their gear looked way too advanced for just hunters, with weapons and armor stacked in abundance, until she and the others took a closer look. The armor looked like it was forged from mithril, so good that even Lillian, holding her breath, couldn't stop comparing it to the royal guards' gear and realizing theirs still didn't match this level of luxury. She flashed a fake smile, bowed low, and apologized, saying a village like Boda must have suffered just to afford something this pricey. Ecto kept his cool and replied that, yeah, Getting weapons and armor like this was a brutal grind, but somehow it was all secured. Then it hit him inside. By dressing the hunters this extravagantly, he'd accidentally yanked a spotlight straight onto what Boda had. His real goal was strengthening Boda's defenses, but now it felt like he'd gone way too far. The guard finally stepped in and introduced himself, Ed, captain of the hunting party, and he totally blew the guests away with his calm, no-nonsense responsibility. Then Captain Ed cleared it up fast. Not every hunter in the village gets mithril armor, because that rare, priceless gear is only saved for the most skilled, battle-hardened fighters who can handle the monsters raging out in the forest. Lillian stood there, speechless, and Captain Ed's words left her scrambling for a way to respond, so she felt the need to steer the conversation again. Ecto slid the conversation in a new direction fast. He told the guests to catch their breath after that brutal journey and promised them a quick tour of the village. He even admitted, with a grim little shrug, that there wasn't a real hotel here, but then his eyes lit up. Boda had outdoor hot springs. He hoped those warm waters could feel like a much-needed reset. And just like that, the guests were hooked. They practically begged to see the springs right away, desperate to soak in the heat for themselves. With their attention finally redirected, Ecto breathed out and quietly thanked Ed for his lightning-quick move. At the same time, the Viscount's cavalry and soldiers marched right into the garrison with the hunting party, while Lillian and the Viscount advanced were ushered into Ecto's home. The second Lillian and Advance spotted the hot spring, their faces lit up with pure shock. They couldn't stop saying they'd never, ever thought they'd get a luxury like that right in their own home. Advance showered Ecto with praise for the brilliant upgrade, while Lillian couldn't stop gushing about soaking in a hot bath out in the open air. Rena, always on the ball, told everyone they could hit the hot spring anytime, and she promised fresh, clean towels would be there soon. Then she revealed the key feature. When you're bathing, the back door can be locked, so you get full privacy and no random interruptions. Ecto explained that this careful design was built to stop Amanda and the other adventurers from barging in unexpectedly. Rena made sure everyone felt comfortable, then slipped away to start cooking dinner, telling the guests to holler if they needed anything while she worked, while Lillian, ahead of time, thanked her for the warmth and care. The guests soaked in the steamy hot spring for ages, basking in that soothing warmth until every ounce of journey weariness finally melted away. When they finally stepped out, a gorgeous dinner greeted them. Fresh, locally grown ingredients cooked with love using one of Rena's special recipes, while everyone dug in and savored every bite. Rena quietly got everything ready, and the moment dinner wrapped up, Lillian slipped back to their room for a long-overdue rest. The next morning, Ecto stepped in and personally led the guests through the village, starting with the huge farmland where rows of colorful vegetables were thriving. The village's fields were so lush and lovingly tended that the visitors were blown away by how hard everyone worked and how much they produced. The tour rolled on with slow, easy strolls through the freshly renovated buildings, each one basically screaming how far the settlement had come. Then the group slipped into the local store, met the manager, a lively cat girl who lit up the whole place. Her charm and energy turned the visit into a light-hearted highlight, and everyone left smiling. After that wild-in-a-good-way day, the guests kicked back in the village's famous hot springs, letting the warm water melt the fatigue right out of their bones. When dinner finally landed, it capped the night perfectly, and with full hearts they headed to their rooms, ready to sleep like champions. Lillian snapped, remembering the real reason she'd come in the first place. She wasn't in the village just to bask in its cozy comfort. She was hunting the truth behind the mithril trade and planning to report it to her grandfather. But right when Rena tried to lock in on the mission, that perfectly cooked breakfast grabbed her attention all over again, temporarily shoved her investigation aside, and the Chancellor's granddaughter couldn't stop herself from praising the maid's amazing, mouth-watering meal. Rena lit up at the compliment and humbly thanked her. Over breakfast, Amanda and the whole adventuring party marched into Ecto's place, saying they'd been out hunting for food. So Lillian, burning with curiosity, immediately asked who they were. Ecto grinned and told her they were the Advancing Wings, a tiny but deadly squad of adventurers, and that they were the only ones in the village. Lillian blinked in shock because she'd honestly expected more adventurers stationed here. With Boda sitting so close to the border and a deadly forest guarding it from all sides, the place screamed danger. So when Lillian heard there were only 5 adventurers, she froze, because that number was a huge clue. These weren't amateurs, they were top-tier professionals with real rank. Watching how they moved, Lillian realized the hunters handled the village's main defense, while the adventurers were brought in to hunt down high-ranked monsters. And then it hit her. Every single one of those 5 adventurers was a woman, and that absolutely blew her away. Suddenly, Lillian blurted out a fearless craving to jump in on the next monster hunt, and her wild request stunned both Ecto and Lillian. And the forward wings left everyone scratching their heads, until the Count immediately snapped that this idea was unthinkable for someone like Lillian, vowing he'd never let her touch something so dangerous. Still, Lillian didn't budge. She was determined. She swore her dad everything would be fine, flashing her pride. She'd graduated top of her magic academy, and then laid out her magic like a weapon. Water magic as her specialty, high-ranking spells in her pocket, monsters would be handled with zero sweat. And that stubborn drive, it wasn't just confidence, it grew from a realization. She'd already soaked up almost everything the village had. Those legendary hunter tools, the massive walls, and even the steamy hot springs. So now she was itching to break past Boda's borders and see what the world had waiting for her. For her, jumping in with the adventurers felt like the start of a real, jaw-dropping adventure, until Ecto stepped in and shut it down. He spoke to Lillian straight, warning her not to mess around by underestimating monsters, because real fights weren't like school lessons where everything stayed safe. Lillian refused to back off. She insisted she'd be totally fine as long as 5 skilled, beautiful adventurers stayed at her side, and she doubled down on her high-rank magic, claiming her power was the one thing she could always trust. Ecto watched her closely, and the truth hit him. Even with all that talent, she was still an impulsive kid who didn't yet understand how heavy this situation really was. Even if Lillian could swing high-rank magic, her stubborn insistence was grinding Ecto down. So he figured a real hunt would knock that overconfidence right out of her. If she fought a monster with her own hands, she'd finally feel how dangerous it was. In the end, the young lord gave in and agreed to take her along, but he made one thing crystal clear. He couldn't promise she'd be completely safe, and she had to stay right with the group at all times. Ecto whipped around to the worried Viscount and promised him no way would Lillian be dragged anywhere truly dangerous. The Viscount still looked uneasy, but he swallowed his pride and apologized for his daughter's outburst, admitting that even his own stubborn daughter was something he couldn't quite explain. Ecto's jaw dropped when Rinny blurted out that she was joining the hunt too. Her recovery magic could save them if anyone got hurt, she explained. And Ecto, impressed by her foresight, nodded fast and thanked her for stepping up to help. Unbeknownst to them all, something way more terrifying was lurking deep in the forest, hidden in the shadows, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Once they finished gearing up the adventurous squad, Lillian in tow, the Chancellor's gorgeous, steel-spined granddaughter, charged into the thick, deadly forest. As usual, Orem snapped into scout mode, eyes sharp, searching for the perfect target to hunt. Ecto ordered Orem to hunt down the lowest-ranked monster she could find and drag it back to the group. And even though Orem was always reliable and skilled, she couldn't shake the irritation. Babysitting a noble's daughter and catering to her whims wasn't even close to her usual kind of job. After wandering through the forest for a while, Orem suddenly spotted something, and her instincts screamed that it was exactly what she needed. Without even hesitating, she snatched up a stone and hurled it with deadly accuracy to bait the monster orc. While the rest of the squad drifted through the forest in easy, calm steps, Lillian, seeing such a dense, living woodland for the first time, got completely hooked by its beauty, breathing in the crisp tree scent and letting birdsong wash over her with pure wonder. Amanda wasn't buying any of it. She scowled at Lillian's carefree face, muttering that the young noble seemed to think they were just out for a harmless stroll in a safe, quiet place, totally blind to what was hiding in the shadows. And that calm didn't last. Distant screams tore through the air, and Ecto and Amanda both froze, stunned, while Lillian and the others gaped in shock, not knowing what was happening. Then Orem sprinted straight at them, voice razor-sharp as she blared urgent warnings about a magical beast closing in fast. The half-dwarf scout snapped that 3 D-rank orcs were closing in, and before she could even finish, they erupted from the distance, fast as lightning despite those hulking bodies. Orm's taunt had hit dead center. Now the furious orcs came roaring straight for her, all hungry for revenge. Amanda finally snapped into her element, adrenaline surging like it was coming home. Then she barked orders for the squad to get ready to fight. But before the battle even began, Lillian strode right up and stole the moment. The young noblewoman stood there with pure authority and zero doubt, declaring the adventurers didn't need to lift a finger because she'd handle it herself. And if anyone had a problem, they could speak up. Lillian had already started lining up her spell, ready to unleash it. With a few sharp hand flicks, she summoned water magic in an instant. One of the top-tier techniques, freeze. Lillian snapped her command, and a blazing stream of shimmering icy water tore out, surging straight into the charging orcs and swallowing them whole in a brutal, freezing grip. In the blink of an eye, the enraged monsters froze solid, trapped inside sparkling blocks of ice. Just like that, the danger vanished. Lillian refused to just stand there and freeze the monsters. She flicked her hand and unleashed a bone-chilling wind that smashed through the frozen orcs, ripping them apart until they broke into glittering shards scattered across the forest floor. Lillian's magical display blew the roof off. Her companions stared in stunned awe. Even the battle-scarred adventurers who'd survived a lifetime of deadly encounters couldn't help but marvel at the sheer power and razor-sharp precision of her magic. Standing tall like she owned the world, Lillian clearly knew exactly what kind of shock she'd just unleashed, because her performance left every adventurer and Ecto reeling, fully realizing how dangerous the Chancellor's granddaughter really was. Ecto in particular couldn't mask his jaw-drop astonishment. He'd badly misjudged her, and now he was staring at her potential like it was unstoppable. She wiped out 3 orcs at once, effortless. No sweat, no struggle, and that was the real reason she'd been so cocky when she insisted on coming with them into the forest. Ecto then insisted the hunt was over and urged them to head back to the village for rest. But just when he thought it would work, Lillian snapped. She flared up, shouted that she was only getting warmed up, and demanded they keep hunting dangerous monsters. Reluctantly, the squad pushed forward, and every monster that stumbled into their path got instantly turned to ice by Lillian's crushing magic. Every time she claimed a win, her excitement skyrocketed. She lived for the rush of battle. With the journey still rolling, Lillian's magic just kept pouring out like there was no end, and everyone stared in pure shock. But the hunt pushed her too far. The thrill of smashing everything started to eat at her, and that once proud young noblewoman began acting like a reckless kid drunk on her own power. Amanda snapped out of her awe and got worried fast, warning that all that loud magic noise would pull in monsters far worse than they could handle. Orm jumped in, saying every extra minute in the forest might make it impossible to reach the village alive. Then Ecto stepped in hard. Lillian had to shut it down, no more magic, and head back right now. Because a demonic beast was closing in, and if they lingered 1 second longer, the forest would swallow them. With his warning still hanging in the air, the fearless young noblewoman shot it down immediately, declaring she'd never turn back. She bet everything on her own power, bragging that she could smash any monster, and making sure everyone remembered she was the top graduate of her magic school. Before anyone could stop her, the Chancellor's bold granddaughter shoved forward and squared up to the hulking, beer-ranked troll that had just appeared. Lillian's eyes widened, her courage flared, and she went in determined to prove she was finally ready to shine. With total confidence, she hurled her freezing magic again, only for everything to fall apart instantly. The troll was way tougher and smarter than the monsters she'd faced, and with a brutal swing of its arm, it slapped the icy stream aside and sent her spell skidding harmlessly away. The troll stood there unhurt, and for the first time Lillian's magic failed. She froze in shock, like her brain refused to catch up, and that confident face finally shattered into panic, because the enraged troll started charging straight at her. Right before disaster could hit, Nora, the powerful half-giant adventurer, rocketed into action and sprang to Lillian's side, smashing her massive shield up in time to absorb the troll's crushing strike. Nora's voice cracked like thunder with pure urgency as she demanded that Lillian pull back right now, and the rest of the attack-wing crew slammed into the fight alongside her. Amanda's lightning-quick sword slashes kept the troll stumbling with 0 openings, while Sepha's razor-accurate arrows punched in deadly hits. With their razor-sharp combat skills and deadly mithril weapons, the squad completely flipped the battle in their favor, so even a terrifying B-rank troll couldn't stand a chance against their perfectly coordinated assault. Doreen, the group's sorceress, landed the final blow, blasting the forest with a colossal burst of fire magic that lit everything up. The adventurers scrambled to scatter away from the blast's epicenter, and once they were safely out of range, Ecto spun toward Lillian. He looked completely rattled, breathing hard, and snapped, "Are you okay?" And the worry in his voice was loud. Lillian forced out a shaky, "I'm fine," even as her lingering fear clung to every word. The young noble woman bowed her head, apologized to Rena for being such a burden, and thanked her for helping. Then Rena, all kindness, promised to cast recovery magic to help Lillian steady herself. With the threat finally gone, Ecto could only breathe out in relief, grateful everyone had survived with no scars. But just when the group started to loosen up, disaster struck. Flustered and still rattled, Lillian spun and took a few careless steps backward. And in the chaos, she never saw the brutal cliff rising right behind her. The floor crumbled beneath her, and she dropped into empty air, pure, terrifying silence, while Ecto stood far too out of reach to save her. Ecto could only stare in helpless horror. But before Lillian could drop any farther, Renaa was already there, lunging in on pure instinct, grabbing Lillian and throwing herself into the fall with her as they tumbled together. Watching two girls plunge like that was the scariest thing Ecto had ever seen. Right then, he felt completely helpless, trapped, with no way to stop the brutal fall that was crushing them. The half-elf Sepha clocked what happened to Lillian and Renaa in an instant, and without a second thought, she fired up her floating ability. With a burst of wind magic, he summoned an air current to cradle the girls as they dropped, and the falling slowed to a controlled glide. Renaa and Lillian, still dazed from the fall, clung to the hope that they'd land without disaster. And when the magic settled, they realized the danger had finally eased. Ecto praised Sepha for saving them in time, but the half-elf warned that she could only slow their descent, not hoist them back up the cliff, so a rescue would have to be done the hard way, while the whole group scrambled to plot their next move. Orem spotted yet another urgent problem and shot it straight to Ecto's. She warned them that the jungle floor wasn't safe either. Those towering trees were packed with thick, tangled branches, and once the girls got caught, they'd be stuck up there before they could even land safely. Orm's predictions hit the mark almost immediately. Lillian found herself painfully crammed in the thick branches of a towering tree, and yeah, she was uncomfortable as hell, but at least she dodged a deadly crash. Thanks to Sepha's help, Lillian finally caught her breath, and then she clocked her situation in one sharp glance. She was sitting on a tree like it was a throne, a full 10 meters above the forest floor. The young noblewoman reckoned the only way out was to climb down through the branches, using the trunk like a lifeline. Then her feet hit the descent, and she immediately realized this was way harder than she thought. Just as she started to gain a little ground, Rhine's voice snapped through the air, calling her name. Trapped on a nearby branch, the maid waved frantically, begging Lillian to stay as silent as a shadow. But when Lillian finally caught sight of Renee's terrified face, she opened her mouth to ask what was happening. Then a gut-chilling truth hit her, and her question died on her lips. Rising out of the forest shadows below, a cyclops' grotesque, massive head loomed into view, and its single, unblinking eye locked hard onto Lillian. Terror surged through her like nothing she'd ever survived. Then the cyclops exploded forward with a savage lunge. A giant hand shot out, and with zero effort, scooped Lillian clean off the branch where she'd been perched. As Ecto plunged down in a panic, he screamed for the monster to let go. Then Lillian, shaking with fear, barked back at the cyclops to release her. In its iron grip, she still gathered every ounce of magic and fired off a brutal freezing spell, but the beast shrugged it off and squeezed harder, so hard that a terrifying crack rang out, signaling the cracking of her frail bones. Rena's fear slammed into her so hard she could barely breathe. Above them, Ecto clocked the danger and snapped into action. There was no time to waste, so he dove down as fast as he could. He turned to Sepha and demanded her help, and the half-elf nodded, then sent out her floating magic to support the young lord. As the danger spiked, Ecto thundered straight at the Cyclops, adamant blade blazing overhead, and then slammed down with everything he had. He tore the monster's arm clean off and yanked it into releasing the captive. Then the Cyclops screamed in pure agony, its roar shaking the air as it staggered from the sudden loss. While Sepha's levitation magic carried her down, Renaa dropped safely from the treetops, shaken but unhurt. Still, Ecto caught the look on her face and snapped her to stay sharp, pushing her to help Lillian, who lay unconscious. Renaa bolted to the noblewoman and braced herself to fire off recovery magic. But Sepha burst in, stepping in between them and calmly, firmly nudging Renaa aside, swearing she'd handle Lillian herself. Then Sepha threw all her focus into reviving the wounded young woman. With no time to waste, little Orem dug deep and unleashed her earth magic, snatching a massive boulder off the ground and throwing it straight at the Cyclops. The hit was brutal, but the Cyclops threw up its defenses and swallowed most of the blast. Then, right in that split second where it faltered, Amanda and Nora pounced on the opening it left behind. Together, they hit like a storm. Amanda's razor-precise blade danced in perfect rhythm with Orem's stone projectiles, while Nora slammed her shield into the monster again and again without letting up. Their teamwork started grinding the Cyclops down. Amanda swung her mithril weapon and landed a decisive strike, chopping off one of its legs and crushing its chance to keep moving. Even hurt, the Cyclops still radiated danger. Then its fury erupted, and it slammed into Nora's shield with a crushing hit. Nora held the impact, but Amanda's focus snapped to concern for her teammate for just a heartbeat, and that tiny lapse was enough to turn the tide. While she was totally oblivious, a massive stone came crashing in, sent straight from the Cyclops. Amanda took the boulder full-on, got slammed to the ground, and left Ecto frozen in pure terror. Then Doreen, the team's sorceress surged into action and blasted a devastating fire spell. With a roaring blast, the adventurers swallowed the Cyclops in flames and clenched up, praying this would finally smash the fight to dust. When the flames finally died down, their relief curdled into dread. Then the Cyclops burst out of the inferno unscathed, fuming even harder than before.